Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for being able to join the 2023 Animas and San Juan Watersheds Conference. My name is Mark Sheely, and on behalf of the New Mexico Water Resources Research Institute, I'd like to welcome you all here. I'm really excited to get to our day and a half of oral presentations as well as the poster presentations that we have planned for later today. Just some quick housekeeping to get out of the way before we start our program. Let's see here. As I mentioned, the poster session will be taking place after oral conference presentations today from 3:30 to 5 p.m. Stick around for that. Let's see, for all of our presenters who are joining via Zoom, I want to say thank you as well for being able to join the conference this way. For those of you who'd like to submit questions or comments during our Q&A sessions of presentations, I'll just ask that you put them in the chat or Q&A feature, and myself and my colleague Minhaz will relay those through the speaker here, or sorry, through the microphone here, to our conference presenters. Those of you in the conference room with us today, if you have a question, we'd like to ask that you come up to the microphone here in front of the stage. This just enables our attendees on Zoom to be able to hear the questions that are being asked. Otherwise, if you just kind of ask from the room, they won't necessarily be able to hear that. The Wi-Fi, if you haven't already been able to connect, you can just connect to the SJC guest Wi-Fi account. For those who are attending the field trip, I just wanted to remind anyone who might have signed up earlier but no longer plans to go on the field trip to get in touch with our check-in registration desk staff. We do have a waiting list for our field trip, so if you're not able to attend, that means we can offer your spot to somebody else who may want to attend the field trip. After the field trip on Thursday from 5:30 to 6:30, we'll be holding a little post-conference social networking gathering at the No Worries Sports Bar and Grill. So you can find us there if you'd like to mingle, get to know some more conference attendees after the conference has ended on Thursday. For our presenters, you'll have the option to view your notes here on the laptop at the podium. We also have a slide clicker here, so you can just advance or go back in your slides this way. I originally was going to play a video here this morning, but I think I'll save that for during our lunch. We'll make a nice little luncheon entertainment for you all. I'd really like to get to our first presenter of the conference. It's my pleasure to welcome up here Sarah Gerlitz-Peck. She is a Restoration Program Manager for the New Mexico Office of the Natural Resources Trustee in Albuquerque. Her professional experience includes FEMA grants management and natural hazard management planning for the New Mexico Department of Homeland Security, water resources management for the City of Phoenix, a GIS technician for the City of Albuquerque Open Space, and has held several seasonal positions performing environmental surveying and sampling in the Pacific Northwest. In her role at the Office of the Natural Resources Trustee, she oversees natural resources restoration planning activities and restoration projects, project implementation for the office while participating in trustee councils and technical working groups to develop natural resource damage assessments throughout New Mexico. Sarah, welcome up here to the podium and looking forward to your presentation.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here today at the conference. I'm from the Office of Natural Resources Trustee. I'm going to showcase our restoration plans and projects from the Gold King Mine settlements. ONRT is a small state agency. We turned 30 this spring with a mission to restore natural resources that have been injured by the release of hazardous substances or oil. How I like to describe it is restoration through litigation against polluters that contaminate New Mexico's natural resources. ONRT's authority is established by the New Mexico Natural Resources and Trustee Act, CERCLA, the Oil Pollution Act, and the Clean Water Act. ONRT's role is distinct from New Mexico Environment Department after the release of a contaminated substance. While New Mexico Environment Department addresses the remediation, ONRT focuses on what happens next, the restoration side of a cleanup event, and making communities whole from those natural resources that were lost. We quantify through the restoration process the type, amount, or alternate restoration activities necessary to compensate the public for the injury to the natural resource, and to compensate the public for the injury through settlement funds, through funding activities, and ultimately restoration implementation. Our ability to perform these activities throughout New Mexico is through federal process laid out under CERCLA and OPA called NRDA. The NRDA process is a natural resource damage and assessment and restoration process that allows the Office of Natural Resource Trustee to evaluate natural resource injuries caused by the release of hazardous substances to the environment. This is a process utilized throughout the United States by various trustees, including tribal and state entities. Trustees are designated federally as federal or state government entities that are responsible for managing natural resources for the public good. New Mexico's Natural Resources Trustee is Maggie Hart Stebbins. She was appointed by Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham in 2019, and she's the head of our agency. I focus more on the restoration side of this assessment process, with planning and implementing the restoration actions determined from an assessment and evaluation of an injury. Our office then pursues litigation and is able to distribute these funds to the affected communities through a project solicitation process. We've primarily been doing this in the last few years from the Gold King Mine settlements. ONRT is part of two state agencies that have pursued this litigation, led by the New Mexico Attorney General's Office and the Environment Department. Of the $48 million of settlement funds that have come into New Mexico, ONRT has received a portion of them, including $1 million from the mining defendant settlement. That was the owners of the Gold King mine. $10 million from a settlement with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and an additional $2 million from the subcontractors who actually caused the release at Gold King Mine. That was received in December. So through our ability to conduct the NRDA process on behalf of the state of New Mexico, we did a project solicitation for all of these funds and the publication of two restoration plans over the last few years. The first restoration plan was the mining defendant settlement funds, the $1 million. We received 5 project proposals. 4 projects were ultimately selected through our evaluation and screening criteria process as directed through NRDA. And right now we have 3 projects under a memorandum of agreement and are in active implementation here in the Animas and San Juan watersheds. These projects include the Cedar Hill Boat Ramp, recently completed by San Juan County, Farmington's Festival and Farmers Market Pavilion, the Soil and Water Conservation District's Soil Health Restoration Project, and the Agricultural Irrigation System Upgrade Project from the Hogback Chapter House. These projects are throughout the Animas and San Juan watersheds, and we most recently had a celebration event for the completion of our first of these settlement-funded restoration projects here in San Juan County. In partnership with the county, ONRT contributed $160,000 to the Cedar Hill Boat Ramp to compensate for in-river recreational losses from the Gold King mine spill, and to the benefit of boaters, anglers, and other river-based recreators and businesses here in the watersheds. This project specifically has led to a wonderful boat loading and unloading area with adequate parking, turnaround, including a changing station, restroom facility, trash recycling, security gate, and we're just thrilled that we were able to get this money out into the community within a year. And that is going to be the first of a total 14 projects from these Gold King mine settlements that I'm going to go over with you all today. Another upcoming project here in Farmington is the Festival and Farmers Market Pavilion project. This project aims to restore the use of agricultural losses from the Gold King mine spill to the affected vendors that are in attendance at the Farmington Museum for the weekly growers market. ONRT is funding an actual permanent flexible structure space, an actual building, as a larger part of the Farmington Gateway Park project to provide just wonderful benefits along the Animas River to the agricultural community. This project isn't quite yet underway. We're anticipating completion in the next 6 months to a year. The third project that is active from the first mining defendant settlement is the San Juan Soil and Water Conservation District Soil Health Restoration Project. This project aims to restore agricultural use from those farmers who had to shut their gates during the release in 2015. Fields were left fallow, soil health degraded, and through our funding of this project, we're aiming to compensate those losses through the implementation of farm assessment plans, soil testing, and providing the materials like fencing, seeds, cover crop seed, compost to help these farmers become active again and to start growing the crops that they weren't able to grow after the spill. This project is ongoing through 2017, and to date, 15 farmers have completed the farm, enrolled in the program with farm assessment plans conducted and soil testing underway. The last project in our initial settlement was for the Hogback Chapter House. They proposed agricultural improvements at the Hogback intake station on the San Juan River. ONRT is going to purchase the pumps for a full redesign of this intake and diversion structure. This is a Tier 2 project in our restoration planning process. All the proposals are ranked. Tier 1 is funded initially, and Tier 2 projects are funded if funding sources remain, or if another Tier 1 project is not able to implement. In this case, we are dedicated to providing the $250,000 to the Hogback Chapter House upon the completion of a settling pond that is part of this overall redesign. The timing on this is still to be determined at this point, but ideally in the next few years, we'll be able to contribute to this overall project. Our most recent restoration plan for the EPA settlements was released on May 30th. We began a project solicitation on this in October of last year. We received 17 wonderful proposals. This was really hard. We would love to fund all 17. With $12 million, we had over, I believe, $30 million of proposals that came into our office. So through the NERDA process, we spent the winter reviewing and assessing, evaluating each project through those guidelines, working with the proponents on requests for information. And we also added a new step this year. Given the amount of proposals received, we did a spot check of engineering feasibility study for the cost estimates of these projects. 3 of the 10 final Tier 1 projects had an engineering screening review. Part of these settlements, a total $12 million, will be funding about $11.1 million of restoration activities. We're also withholding the remainder of those funds for ONRT cost recovery. That includes the cost to do the planning process and implementation of the projects as a lead agency for some of them. If there's funds remaining, either from cost underruns on the initial 10 projects or for some of these additional settlements, we can then select Tier 2 projects. Project locations that we've ultimately selected are throughout the Animas and San Juan watersheds. We're partnering with local municipalities, with sister state agencies, with Navajo Nation, Department of Fish and Wildlife. We're just really thrilled that these funds can have an impact in the Animas and San Juan watersheds in the next few years. I'm going to go over the 10 proposals that received Tier 1 funding. The first entity we received 2 proposals from was City of Aztec for a total of $1.43 million. These restoration activities intend to restore surface water losses and protect potential groundwater contamination. The first project is the North Main Wastewater Management Infrastructure Project at North Main at the redesigned intersection in Aztec. ONRT is going to fund a restroom facility at this redesigned location, and then the eventual sewer lift intake station and sewer improvements to provide wastewater treatment options for 8 undeveloped commercial lots. This is the intent here, being so close to the Animas River, is instead of installing a septic tank, it can be connected into the existing sewer system. The second project is the Reservoir 1 rehabilitation project. ONRT is just one funder on this high-dollar project, contributing $950,000 towards construction. This project will allow the city to have their full storage capacity for the drinking water supply in the event of another catastrophic release. There will be more storage capacity for human consumptive use during a spill event. The completion for these projects varies, estimated currently between 2024 and 2026. The next project is Farmington's Whitewater Wave and Irrigation Diversion Dam at Gateway Park. This project was initially submitted with the Whitewater Wave feature only in our first Gold King Mine restoration plan, but was ultimately selected this year because they've added additional beneficial components, including a irrigation diversion dam with a fish ladder. So not only aquatic habitat improvements, agricultural delivery infrastructure improvements, but recreational uses through the Whitewater Wave as proposed in front of the Farmington Museum as another Gateway Park project. We're working with the city right now on the timeline, and we're contributing $2 million to this project. We are also funding more boat ramps under this Gold King Restoration Plan number 2. We're funding the Ninanazad Chapter House Boat Ramp Improvement Project as proposed by Navajo Nation Department of Fish and Wildlife. This improvement will allow for additional sampling opportunities in this stretch of the San Juan River. It'll also allow Chapter House members road improvements to access the boat launch and this beautiful public space. This project should be able to be completed this fall and winter during the water period, and we're excited to continue to provide recreational opportunities to our partners at the nation. We're also partnering with other state agencies, including New Mexico State Parks. We'll be splitting the costs for an aquatic invasive species station at Texas Hold Day Use below Navajo Dam to prevent potential damage to aquatic habitat. So if by having this decontamination station available, it'll prevent a potential loss to the San Juan Quality River stretch of the San Juan River, protecting recreational opportunities into the future. We're also working with the Interstate Stream Commission, and I had the privilege of attending a celebration event for the first release of the San Juan water release, the first water release for onto the San Juan River from this leasing partnership between Hickory Apache, the Nature Conservancy, and the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission. There'll be another presentation on this, I believe, later today from the Interstate Stream Commission, but ONRT is dedicating $1.8 million of funding to fund future water releases from this partnership. We're also partnering again with the district to fund irrigation, ditch, and diversion projects up to $1.6 million. This project was one of the 3 projects we did an engineering feasibility review on. We decided to make this project a phased approach. Phase 1 will fund the design, the permitting, and construction-ready bid documents for 5 separate projects for separate ditch companies throughout the basin. Depending on the remaining costs, the district will be able to fund several projects, 2 projects, maybe all 5 with additional funding and to actual construction phase in the future years. We're excited to continue to contribute to the agricultural use of surface water throughout the Animas and San Juan watersheds through this project. And then finally, we're continuing our partnership with San Juan County with $3.9 million of settlement funds going to 3 separate projects for multiple benefits to the basins, including the Tota subdivision water and wastewater system improvements. We're going to be funding $1 million of this $11 million project. Specifically, we're going to focus on the wastewater components. We're also funding more boat ramps, McGee and Lions Park, including Lions Park park improvements. And finally, we're going to be one of the funders for the NMSU Extension Office building. We'll contribute $2.3 million to that project in collaboration with the county and New Mexico Attorney General's office, who also received settlement funds that were distributed for this project. Finally, ONRT looks forward to the implementation of the next round of restoration projects and the resulting benefits anticipated for the Animas and San Juan watersheds. As made evident in these recent front page articles, there's community support for these activities, and these activities will hopefully help the community plan, adapt, and become more resilient with the water variability in the upcoming years.
Okay. Well, for our next presenter to move along with our series of morning presentations, I'm happy to have Peter Butler come to the stage. Peter has worked on abandoned mine and water quality issues in the Animas River Basin for almost 30 years. He's worked with the Animas River Stakeholder Group for 25 years and served many years as the group's coordinator. He's currently the chair of the Bonita Peak Community Advisory Group, advising EPA on issues regarding the Bonita Peak Mining District Superfund site. He has a bachelor's degree in physics, a master's in economics, and a PhD in natural resource policy. And over the years, he served as chair of the Colorado River Quality Control Commission, the Colorado Air Quality Control Commission, and the Southern Ute Indian Tribe / State of Colorado Environmental Commission. Peter, so honored to have you present here today. Okay, let's see. Can you? Oh, sorry, I just got that. Okay.
Is this button working or not?
Oh, yep, you can use this to advance your slides.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me down here. I just wanted to comment that I thought the last presentation was really interesting to me because Colorado has also received natural resources damages funds, not as much as New Mexico, but Colorado has made no steps and made no movement towards allocating or using those funds whatsoever. So that was kind of interesting to see how far along that New Mexico has already gotten with this process. Part of that reason is I think that some of that money may be spent up closer towards the Bonita Peak Superfund site, and people want to see what EPA is going to actually do on the ground before they start thinking about spending some of the natural resource money. But that was very interesting. Thanks very much. I'm going to give you kind of an overview of what's going on from the Bonita Peak Mining District Superfund site. I've been down here several times each year. Let me see if this works. There we go. The site was designated in 2016, about a year after the Gold King spill. It consists of 46 mine sites and 2 study areas in San Juan County, Colorado. And kind of interestingly about this is there's no boundaries to the Superfund site. It could be anywhere where they find contamination. In fact, EPA argued that if they found sources of contamination all the way down here in New Mexico, that the Superfund site could be extended down to here. That hasn't happened. I certainly don't see that happening, but it's interesting. There's no boundaries. There's no boundaries around these mine sites either. So mine claim owners around those mine sites don't know if they're really included in that site or not. So that's kind of creates some confusion there. There are 3 general site goals to this Superfund site that EPA initially put together. One is to improve water quality. That's kind of the biggest focus. Another is to stabilize source areas, in other words, mine sites, to keep more debris from coming into the river. And the other is to minimize unplanned releases, which of course is what the Gold King spill was. I threw that photo up there. You can see that Cement Creek often, well, I shouldn't say often, but when we have really heavy rainstorms, it can look pretty ugly up there. This is taken in Silverton. Here's a map kind of showing all the different sites around up in San Juan County. The 4 areas in blue are the target areas for improving water quality. Those are all areas that have some aquatic life. There's some fish in those areas, but they're oftentimes the fish populations are pretty minimal in those particular areas. So those are kind of the target sites in particular to improve water quality. And the top priority is the one that says number 1 kind of down there at the bottom of the map, which is down below Silverton in the Animas Canyon. I will note that there's 46 sites up here. Personally, I think a lot of those sites didn't necessarily need to be on the list. They're pretty small, they're pretty minor, they're really not contributing that much. The vast majority of the metals that are coming from mine sites are up in the headwaters of Cement Creek, right around where the Gold King is. A number of years ago, the Animas Stakeholders Group looked at, we sampled about 150 mines up there. We found that 4 mines were contributing about 50% of all the mine loading. And those 4 mines are all right next to each other up there by Bonita Peak, up there by the Gold King site. So anyway, a lot of these sites are probably need pretty minimal work. A little bit about the group that I work with. It's the Bonita Peak Community Advisory Group. It's called a CAG, and that is something that is actually written into circular law, that communities can form an official advisory group to advise EPA and other agencies on issues regarding that Superfund site and local issues. This CAG has been recognized officially by EPA. We have 15 local members. Currently, we have 5 from Silverton, 9 from around Durango, and we have 1 from Farmington. There's no set number that they have to come from different locales, but that's just how it balances out right now. 4 of the appointees are appointed directly by local governments in Colorado: San Juan County, La Plata County, City of Durango, and the town of Silverton each have 1 representative that they appoint, and the other members are all at large. So the CAG's members, we try hard to make sure they represent a variety of interests. They all have to live in the watershed. We hold monthly public meetings, and we also do those on Zoom. So if people want to see those, you're certainly welcome to join in. You can go, we have a website. If you just Google Bonita Peak CAG, you can find it, and you can sign up for our email list if you have more interest in that. We've also been sampling monthly in the Animas Canyon. The agencies, different federal agencies, were kind of scratching their heads trying to figure out how they would get in there to sample, because the access is very difficult. They had a meeting, and the result of the meeting was we need another meeting, and at that point the CAG said, we're just going to volunteer, we're going to hike in and get those samples for you, and the state of Colorado, with some WIN money, is actually paying for all the processing of all the samples. So we've been hiking in almost close to 4 years to a couple sites in the Animas Canyon monthly. And in the wintertime, we ride the train up to Cascade. That's one of our sites. And then the other site is down below Elk Park, and we ski down the tracks, which is a pretty long haul. It's about 13.5-mile ski to get in there and out to get samples. But we think that's very valuable data. Another thing that the CAG has done is last year we proposed the addition of an aquatic life use designation and accompanying water quality standards up in Mineral Creek. Mineral Creek had actually seen a great improvement in water quality because of work that was done prior to the Superfund site, that was done by the Animas River Stakeholders Group, and much to our surprise that several years later there was fish found in that segment of Mineral Creek, and so we went to the State Water Quality Control Commission and asked for additional protections for that segment, which they granted. I just kind of threw up this picture because I thought it was kind of a general interest. This was taken in April going down the tracks. There were two massive avalanches that came down in April that actually dammed the Animas. One of them is in the background of that photo. The other one is downstream where that photo was taken. The water in the Animas was back 20 feet before it actually found a way out around that avalanche. You can see in the kind of closer up there, you can see the high water line up on the sides there of the snow. It'll give you a sense of how much the water was backed up. And the water actually went up and over the tracks. So that's how much these avalanches caused dams in the Animas. And one thing we do note is a lot of metals end up dropping out right there. And so we get a little more of a flush when all that snow melts because a lot of metals have dropped out in these, partly because of these avalanches, but there's also ice dams constantly up in the canyons during the winter time. So different site activities that have been going on. There's been some stabilization projects. I think most of the CAG views these as kind of fairly minor projects. The largest one was the one in this photo. This was actually a pretty sizable project. This is the North Star mine. That's Mineral Creek. This is just outside of Silverton. And that mine waste was all up against the creek where the creek was kind of eating into it. And EPA came in and probably moved about 60,000 yards of material and pulled that whole mine dump back away from the creek. Whether or not that's going to make a huge water quality impact, I think is a little debatable, but they felt like that was a good project to kind of get their teeth kind of started on getting into different projects up in the Animas Basin. Some of the other stabilization projects include things like moving mine drainage off of mine dumps. Again, it's a little debatable that makes much of a difference, but it's not a bad thing to do either. Some other site activities this year, they're going to be drilling from Lake Emma into the Sunnyside Mine Pool. The Sunnyside Mine Pool is all the water that's backed up in the Sunnyside mine from bulkheads that were put into the tunnels there a long time ago as part of their reclamation plan. The first bulkhead was put there in 1996. It backed up the water. The last that it was measured, it was 1,200 vertical feet deep in that mine pool. There's a lot of pressure on that bulkhead. There's two more bulkheads kind of downstream from it. But the last time anyone knew what the actual level of that water was is 2002. So that's because that other bulkheads were put in later. There was a pressure gauge on that first bulkhead, which is now no longer accessible. So the idea is to drill in there and kind of see where is the water level and what's the quality in that. And I'll show you a picture of that a little later. There's continued treatment of the Gold King discharge. That's been ongoing since about 2 or 3 months after the Gold King spill. There's also, I think, very serious consideration of building a new treatment plant up there in the Gladstone area to treat multiple mines, not just the Gold King. The treatment plant that was put in for the Gold King was definitely something you throw up. It was not meant to be a very permanent facility, and it's expensive to run, and there's certainly thought about, EPA is definitely thinking about putting a new facility up there that would be much more efficient and treat a lot more drainage there, which would make a big difference. Sunnyside Gold treated a lot of the drainages up there over 20 years ago. We have some data from when they were treating, and that clearly made a big difference downstream, and the water quality is not as good in the Animas today as it was over 20 years ago. EPA is also just about to let a contract for a large contract for remedial investigations and feasibility studies, which will lead to a final decision as to what they're going to do with all these different sites up there. The big projects that's going on this summer is they're constructing a site-wide repository. This repository will go on top of what's called tailings pond number 4. This is a pretty large tailings pond that Sunnyside Gold had. It's the last one that they had. It was constructed in, I think, 74 to 76. It's about 35 acres on top, the flat area on top, and they are going to put a repository up there for all the sludge from the treatment plant and potentially from other mine sites, other mine waste. So that's going to all be regraded. It's going to be lined. They're going to catch the leachate. They are looking to spend $15 to $16 million this summer on what's called phase 1 of this repository. There'll be a phase 2 and phase 3 to expand that repository at a later date. Potential responsible parties settlements. Most of these we believe have been now completed. There's some circular liability settlements, money that's going to be used for remediation and cleanup. And then, of course, there's the natural resources damage settlements, which we just heard a little bit about. Excuse me. And like I said, I think most of these have been reached. We don't really expect a whole lot more settlement money that's going to come out. The largest one, the largest settlement was with Sunnyside Gold Corp versus the United States for $90 million last year. Interestingly, half of that money came from Gold King, half of that money came from the United States government. And the reason for that is it looks like it's kind of, they basically shared the liability. So that $45 million that came from the US government is to cover liability costs for BLM, Forest Service, and EPA. To our knowledge, this is the first time EPA has ever been a PRP at a Superfund site. So anyway, that's about $90 million there, $75 million EPA will use at the site. $15 million ended up going to BLM and Forest Service, and unfortunately, they just put that into a general remediation fund and will not promise to use that in the Animas Basin, which is something that we complain quite a bit about. Kind of a big picture summary. So for a year following the Gold King release, EPA spent about $30 million in response to the Gold King release. We figured that they've spent about an additional $85 million since the Superfund designation. And by the end of this year, they'll probably spend another $20–25 million, which is quite a bit for a year for them. That's on the repository, Lake Emma, and some other smaller activities, including some more stabilization projects. So by the end of the year, if you include the money that Sunnyside Gold spent since the CERCLA designation, which was about $15 million, and the Forest Service and BLM, I figure that there'll be about $160 million will have been spent by the end of this year at this site since the Gold King spill. And unfortunately, other than the treatment of the Gold King mine drainage, there haven't been any projects completed that are substantially improving water quality. So that's all that's the kind of the way Superfund works, is they spend an enormous amount of money up front, and it takes them a long time before you see the results of all that funding. So I'm going to end there because I kind of want to give people a chance to see if they have any questions.
Yeah, hello, thank you for the presentation. My name is Alan Klatt from the New Mexico Environment Department. I was curious, you said a couple things were debatable, how the stabilization project pulling the tailings back from, I was curious if you could elaborate on that, why it was debatable and what could have been done to provide a greater improvement to water quality.
Sure, thanks. The first big issue is that the vast majority of metal loading in the upper Animas Basin that's mining related comes from the drainage. It's not from the mine waste. We did make calculations a number of years ago. It's a fairly, certainly they can contribute metals, but they're fairly small. In the case of moving mine drainage off a mine waste pile, that mine drainage generally has a lot of iron in it, and it tends to really coat the channel that it's coming down over the mine waste. And it's not clear that there's a lot of interaction with that drainage and into the mine waste itself. And we've repeatedly asked EPA to sample kind of at the top of that drainage and at the bottom of the drainage as it goes over the mine dump, and to measure flow to see if any water's, disappearing into that dump as well. And so far, they've never done it. Another stabilization projects they've done is they've mucked out some kind of retention ponds, small retention ponds in front of some of these drainages. Those retention ponds will help reduce some metals like iron, maybe lead, maybe some copper. But the metal that's the biggest concern in the upper Animas, that's kind of ubiquitous everywhere, is zinc in terms of affecting aquatic life. And zinc stays in a dissolved state. These settling ponds don't really take out any kind of zinc whatsoever. And we've argued for years that zinc was the main issue, and I think EPA has come around to the same conclusion that that's really what they really need to target is zinc. There's very little arsenic that we've seen in the basin. We hardly ever see it above detection limits. Lead, there's some lead, but for example, all the samples that we've done in the canyon below Silverton, dissolved lead has been below detection limits for 4 years, monthly samples taken. So there's not a whole lot of lead coming out up there either, which I think surprised a lot of people. By the way, I threw up these slides just for general interest. This is Lake Emma. That's a picture of it 100 years ago. This is a lake at 12,500 feet. The Sunnyside mine was above it, and then later went under it. In 1978, the mine got too close, and it seemed to have melted ice underneath it, and the lake collapsed through the mine, dropped 2,000 vertical feet through the mine, shot out down there by the Gladstone, and that was a major disaster in the Animas. That did kill fish all the way down to Farmington. And then there's a picture of it on the right there, kind of what it looks like today. So anyway, some people talk about the Lake Emma disaster, and that'll give you a little indication of what that looks like. If you look at old topo maps, it still shows Lake Emma there, but it doesn't exist anymore. Any other questions? All right, well then, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Peter. Okay. All right. Making what I believe is the first presentation from Amigos Bravos for this conference, as far as I can remember, I'd like to welcome Stephen Fry up to the stage. Stephen's responsible for leading policy and project development that improves watershed health, water source protection, and wetland restoration at Amigos Bravos. He also provides research and technical assistance to internal-external requests and works to expand Amigos Bravos' partnerships with organizations and communities throughout New Mexico. Stephen, come on up.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Fry, and I'm with Amigos Bravos. I'm here today to talk to you about Wetland Jewels, promoting climate resiliency through wetland mapping, land planning, and restoration. Amigos Bravos is a statewide organization based in Taos, New Mexico. We've been working to protect and restore the waters of New Mexico since 1988. We have 3 kind of core programmatic activities: protect and restore watershed health, which is like a project I'm about to talk to you about today. We hold polluters accountable. So the organization was started in response to the Cuesta Moly mine, which is now also a Superfund site. We also do a lot of work around LANL, the Clean Water Act, and we've been advocating for a state surface water permitting program. And then we build leadership and capacity for the future, which is a lot of water quality sampling. We've reintroduced otter to the Rio Grande, activities like that. So why are we here? So back in 2016, 2017, St. Mary's Geospatial Services Institute out of Minnesota updated the National Wetland Inventory Mapping for the state of New Mexico. We saw that work and we thought it was incredibly important because it's getting down to discrete geographic areas in our watersheds, and we thought that we could apply that to local land decision and agencies to better protect our watersheds. And so we built the Wetland Jewels based off their mapping, and we also included ecological function on top of the National Wetland Inventory Mapping. So it's not just GIS of our watersheds, we're now attributing ecological function to those areas. So what are wetland jewels? They're either a single wetland or a complex of several wetlands occurring in a distinct geographic area. They provide several important ecological functions to terrestrial and aquatic landscapes, as well as to downstream communities. And we feel that they are a tool to build ecological and community resilience in the face of climate change stressors. So wetlands are a keystone element of our landscapes. They maintain stream flow essential for irrigation and wildlife. They create habitat for that wildlife and ranchland use. They provide clean, consistent water to downstream communities. They mitigate the risk of flooding, and they reduce climate impacts from drought, runoff, and wildfire. They're also the sponges of our watersheds. So when we have healthy wetlands, they store and release water throughout the season, which is great for downstream communities and our ecological services. So St. Mary's is incredibly adept at mapping our ecosystems, but they also get on the ground and ground truth a lot of their stuff, and they add different layers on top. And so it became almost too cumbersome to navigate through the level of data that they're having. So we needed a way to prioritize what matters to local watershed users. So there's different aspects to our watersheds. Some people care about the existing wetlands or proximity to a waterway, impact to surface hydrology, or more societal things like landowner engagement. Can we actually do work on this property? Location within a headwater system, and then also managing peak flows and flooding to downstream communities, preventing damage, agriculture, and zoning. And so in order to get through all these different characteristics of our watershed, we have engaged the community through a stakeholder survey, and these are all of the functions that we're able to map with this service. And so we ask watershed users and managers in the San Juan, what's important to you and your uses of the watershed? And so these are all the things that we can map to specific wetlands in the San Juan watershed. Through conversations with stakeholders, we've identified these other characteristics that we should consider in our mapping analysis. So traditional uses, invasive species is a big one in the San Juan, water quality impairments, which I'll talk about in a little bit more, coordination with grazing, endangered sensitive species, recreational importance, and the other thing that I updated this slide but it didn't make it is riparian connectivity, which is a big thing in the San Juan as well. So we've included that in our analysis for this round. So once we completed the stakeholder survey, we then score each wetland function based on aggregate responses. Each function is then given a score, and then we attribute that to each wetland, and then we also prioritize based on the size of the wetland and proximity to the watershed. So we've done this before. We've done it on the Carson National Forest, the Santa Fe National Forest, and we just completed rounds on the Gila and the San Juan. This is what it looks like on a watershed or geographic scale. So the red areas are the jewels in the Carson. In the top right section, we've done work on 3 of those watersheds, and we're planning one on the top left for next year. We also develop a story map, which is publicly available, so people can engage with the project. You can click on each specific wetland. It'll tell you different characteristics of what's going on there. There's photos for people to engage with, and then you can also see the functions and the scores that we attributed to that wetland, so why it was prioritized. And we feel this is a great tool to interact with funders and different partners to show the community stakeholder engagement that we went through, but also why we prioritize these wetlands for restoration. So as I mentioned, it's a good framework for prioritizing projects and obtaining funding. As most people know, federal and state funding has increased dramatically in the last year. So this is a great way to ensure that those dollars are getting put on the ground in New Mexico in critical projects. The other thing I like to mention is we have done a lot of this work in the Carson, and we have coordination with grazers. And so we hired a range rider to keep cattle out of the riparian zone this year. We work with them to make sure that their cattle are getting their adequate forage and access to water while also protecting our wetlands and riparian zones. So these are just a few photos of a project that we've done called Midnight Meadows. It's low-tech, process-based restoration. What we're trying to do is reconnect the floodplain, eliminate channelization of our rivers, and kind of re-wet the meadows so that they're healthy and they're storing our water during the snow melt and then releasing it later throughout the year. So these are just some more photos of Midnight Meadows to demonstrate the type of restoration that we're trying to achieve. So the other thing that we're advocating for is water quality sampling. The New Mexico Environment Department, while they do the best job they can, they only monitor our waters once every 9 to 10 years, which is not adequate when we're considering the changes that we're seeing with fire and different aspects to our environment. Amigos Bravos has been testing the rivers in Taos County since 2007. We have a co-op with NMED, so they accept our data when they consider the 303D list and impairments in our watersheds. We've expanded that to the San Juan this year, and these are just some of the samples or parameters that we're testing for in the San Juan. So 14 out of 16 assessment units in the San Juan and Animas are impaired according to the 303D list. E. coli, temperature, and sedimentation are the top impairments. And TMDLs have been created for E. coli, sedimentation, phosphorus, and temperature, but this doesn't mean that action is being taken. It's just an investigation of what's going wrong and potential restoration options. And so then we're trying to elevate the importance for actually implementing these solutions through some of our work. So we did the stakeholder survey earlier this year. This is the responses we got from stakeholders in San Juan. So groundwater recharge, bank and shoreline stabilization, waterfall and water bird habitat, unique and valuable plant communities have all risen to the top. So based on these responses, this is how we identified the wetland jewels in the San Juan. I apologize that this is likely too small to read and not very detailed. I just got this last week, and so I am now working to finalize these areas and then develop the story map, which I showed a little earlier, and that will be publicly available next month. And we're hoping that people will provide feedback on these areas, whether you think it's feasible to do work there, whether it's not feasible, whether you're interested in working with us, etc. So please get in touch if you have thoughts on these ideas, and I can share this more detailed map when it's finished. So next steps is receiving the last kind of input from stakeholders. If you use the QR code here, it'll take you straight to that survey. It takes about 5 minutes to input your opinions on the watershed. So if you didn't like the characteristics that I just showed for the San Juan, please provide your input and help change it. We're going to finalize the jewels and create the story map. We'll share that publicly, and then we'll start looking to do feasibility studies and project planning and fundraising. And then we also, next year, are going to update the National Wetland Inventory Mapping on the Navajo Nation in partnership with the Navajo EPA, and then hopefully develop a similar project like this to identify and prioritize wetland restoration on the nation. And then this is just my contact information, so I'm going to go back to this in case you want to get that QR code and help me with the survey result. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Hi, thanks for the great presentation. About how many people have taken that survey? And it's kind of a double question. How many people took the survey, and then do you redo that survey for every location? So like the San Juan survey is only for the San Juan, Carson's only for the Carson?
Correct. So we did it based on local watersheds, so the Carson was not included in this. We had 64 responses in the San Juan, which was a little bit lower than I hoped. That's why I'm still kind of trying to gather stakeholder input. But yes, we had 64 responses in the San Juan.
How many did you get on other surveys in other parts of the state?
So I did the Gila this year too. I got 170 on the Gila. For the Carson, we got over 200, but that was a much longer
ramp up.
Exactly, yes.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
I think everyone can hear me, but my question is, your range riders you're talking about to keep grazers off of the wetlands,
Yeah.
how's that working out?
Well, it's going really well. So we have a range rider that's patrolling the area and working with the grazing permittees. So part of what they're doing is keeping the cattle out of the restoration project area, especially while we're doing the work and letting the vegetation regrow. The other aspect that they're doing is they're repairing fencing in the area with materials that we provided in coordination with the grazing permittees. The permittees have been extremely happy with how it's going, and they have now fundraised themselves to keep the range rider in the area post project completion in the fall. So we think it's going well. We piloted it this year, and it's something that we're going to continue to explore in our projects moving forward.
Was there any permittees that were kind of against being forced to not graze in the wetlands?
No, we've been working in this area for a number of years, and so every year we go and update the permittees on the project and what we're hoping to achieve that year. So they've been plugged in since the beginning, and before we put the range rider into action, we talk to them about it and, do you have any concerns? And we try to work to address those. But no, there haven't been any issues or complications so far.
The reason why I'm asking is I'm from Navajo, and we have big issues like grazing wherever, everywhere. And we can get a hold of controlling or enforcing permittees from grazing, especially in the wetlands, where there's protection for livestock and stuff like that. So that's why I was asking. Thank you.
Right. The permittees in this area have been pretty impressed with the project because it's increased water access and forage for the herds. And we're repairing fencing for them, so that's kind of a burden off their back. We understand that grazing is going to occur on our public lands, and that in order to achieve beneficial progress, we have to collaborate rather than be opponents, for lack of a better word. And so this is a way that we found that we can engage and help with their activities while also protecting our projects. So, yeah. Thank you, guys. I'll be around, so if you have any questions, come find me. Thank you.
Okay. Well, given that the New Mexico Water Resources Research Institute is headquartered at New Mexico State University, I'm happy to bring our first Aggie up here to the stage. Jason Benegas is a PhD candidate in water science and management and a Doctor of Economic Development candidate at New Mexico State University. He's an instructor of undergraduate economics and a research assistant at the NMSU Center for Border Economic Development. Jason has also worked with the New Mexico Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department, creating Energy Transition Act educational products, and is working on projects that quantify potential for water-based tourism development in rural areas. Thank you so much for presenting today, Jason. Let's see if I can get your presentation up here. There you go.
Thanks, Mark. Is this? All right. Thanks for having me. This is my first time at Simon College. It's a beautiful campus. It's kind of a maze getting here, but I'm really happy to be here. I'm finishing up my doctorate, as Mark said, and as well as a PhD, and I'm going to be starting next month as a assistant professor in the Cooperative Extension Services at NMSU. So now I'm going to be able to do my research as a full-time job, which I'm really happy about. So I'm hoping to see a lot more of you in the future working with the Cooperative Extension Services from NMSU, because I will be traveling all over the state and hopefully helping people out with any kind of economic development projects they have, whether it's water-based, which is kind of like my focus, agricultural-based, or any other kind of cooperative services. So the research I've been doing in my graduate studies is about finding these opportunities and these potential for using our water resources in New Mexico cooperatively, especially with a lot of agricultural areas where there's no, where there's the potential for revenue building, for job creation, for tax revenue, all these kinds of things that don't take away from some of the traditional economic drivers in the rural areas of New Mexico, because I think there is a lot of potential to have those cooperations. So I kind of focus a little bit more on outdoor tourism than anything, and I want to find these strategies that are going to be able to do these kind of cooperative work between researchers like myself, between nonprofits, between the people that are landowners or land leasers, and just everybody else in the state that has a vision of making New Mexico a more prosperous and more beautiful place. One of the things that I want to do is make sure that there's conservation and preservation going on at the same time that there is economic development, because I think both of them can go hand in hand. And I think if my future job working in cooperative extension services, we can make a lot of these connections. So a lot of the tourism models that are out there, especially when it comes to water tourism development, are kind of based around urban areas. So my focus is on more of the rural areas of New Mexico, because there are a lot of really big contextual differences, and a lot of those models cannot be transferred from a rural area or from an urban area to a rural area and still be able to optimize, again, those relationships. So I'm doing the research that kind of investigates these differences and creating new models that will hopefully help the rural areas in New Mexico be able to use those water resources and, again, create jobs, create tax revenue, at the same time keeping intact those traditional sources of revenue for farmers and ranchers. A lot of the tourism models are kind of these mathematical models that are not very good at being applied in real world use. So what I'm focusing on is these geospatial models that can be developed, especially at NMSU with the cooperative extension, and then taken out to rural areas where they might not have the technical expertise to use them, but we might have them developed. That way, when we go out into the communities, we have something that's a real product that can be used with a local, with somebody that does local GIS work, and if they don't have somebody, again, the cooperative extensions at NMSU, we can send people out to help people do these development projects. So again, I want to make sure that we're using these spatially explicit models that are actually usable in real life for our work with cooperative extension. So I'm addressing some of the deficiencies in the literature with my research. I'm making sure that I'm going to be traveling around New Mexico, getting a lot more, collecting a lot more data, finding out, again, those contextual differences between rural and urban areas and between rural areas themselves, and finding out which water resources in New Mexico have the best potential to be developed for, again, profit production. Something that I hope in the future that I can do is work with policymakers in the county levels and the city levels, on the state levels, to find out what are the best, holistic programs that can be used in their specific communities. And that way we know where the limited resources should be most, spent most wisely. So that's kind of what I want to do, is make sure that these resources, especially in the rural areas, because there's not a lot of resources to do tourism development or water conservation development, making sure those resources kind of get pointed in the right place. So again, I'm using a GIS-based methodology for my research, again, because it's the most applicable to real-world use. And then I'm using ArcGIS software, which I think even some of the communities out there have some people that are able to use this in their own rural communities. If not, again, we have specialists at NMSU Extension Services that can help out with this for any of the communities that don't have those technical expertise, and they need us to come out there and help them with any of these projects that they're working on. So again, New Mexico is big, most of it is rural, and I think that that's why it's important to do this kind of research. I have, in my geospatial analysis, I've kind of broken up New Mexico into these little 10 square mile hexagons. So there's over 18,000 of them that cover the state, but only 253 of them actually are in incorporated areas. Every other those 18,000 hexagons is a rural area. It's a little colonia. It could be empty land. It could be a small village. It could just be a few people living there, right? But we want to make sure that any of those places, again, that have the potential for somebody getting a job, somebody being able to increase their profits from their ranching or farming operations by adding some kind of maybe water tourism to that we identify that. So one of the things that's hard about doing rural development is lack of data. We have state parks, we have some other places where there's logbooks and registration, and that's a good way to collect data, but in a lot of these rural places, there's not a good way to do it. So we have to use some proxies, right? So I'm actually using geotagged photos to use as a proxy for how, how interested people are in going to some of these rural water areas, right? So I'm kind of in the preliminary stages of this, and I'm going to develop this as I'm going along with my new position here. But I think this is a really good thing because now we're able to identify some of those places that might be, one, have the potential for revenue production, especially for to farmers and ranchers that might need some kind of some subsidized income or kind of secondary income. The other thing it could do is identify areas where there should be conservation. Maybe there's too much tourism happening in a place, and we can identify another resource that's water-based, that's close by, kind of spread that out, mitigate the environmental impact. So it's both a economic development tool and a conservation tool that I'm working on. These are some of the variables that I'm using. They're just from, right now, again, it's kind of a preliminary research, so these are just stuff from the literature that seems to be, pertinent to identifying some of these resources. And again, the research as I go along in this first year of my position will be developing these. I'll be actually going around and doing a lot of surveys or collecting surveys that have already been done in New Mexico too that are specific to rural water tourism and trying to integrate this into my model. So one of the statistical things statistical methods that I'm using, instead of using a regular global regression like you see in a lot of research, that kind of just is like a very broad standard statistical regression. I'm using something that actually will be able to identify attenuating effects of things that are important to attract tourism to a specific place. That way we can identify those relationships a little bit better. So what I'm doing is using something called a local regression. I don't know if there's any statisticians out there, but it's a way to kind of account for some of these unique characteristics that would be left out if we were to use any other kind of statistical method. So it's used for analyzing data with spatially varying parameters. Basically, using data or using a way to identify these very important characteristics over a big place like New Mexico that has various rural, urban areas, and even within those areas, we have a lot of different environments, ecosystems. So what the geographically weighted regression does, it creates a model for each one of these little hexagons, the 18,000 hexagons that cover New Mexico. It only includes data from that, and then it's able to kind of reveal some specific patterns in there of what's most important. Again, the things that are most important are going to be those things that have some kind of tourism attraction or some kind of like specific water resource that people want to go to. Again, to create revenue, to create jobs, or maybe use it in a conservation context. So I'll give you a second to read this. It kind of explains why the geographically weighted regression is different than a global regression. A little bit more technical information about the statistical method. Running the global regression, again, this is something that doesn't pinpoint the specific characteristics of each hexagon. There's not a lot that is explained with this type of statistical method. Only 19% of deviation is explained. So it's just not a good method to use in New Mexico when we're trying to identify these resources. The local model is a little bit better. It's still getting developed. It went up from 19% to a 36% of deviation explained. So it's getting better. And I'm hoping, again, in the next year, including some of the qualitative data that I collect as I'm going around in communities, collecting surveys, doing a little bit more of the quantitative data, that this is going to become a much better model for identifying some of these some of these areas where resources could be most well spent. Some more statistical information. So the whole gist of this is that I'm hoping that this model is a little bit better than some of the ones that have been developed. So basically the results indicate that this localized model that I'm using, that I've kind of copied from some other people that have done some really great work, not specifically in water resources, but in other tourism optimization models, it seems like it's working. So that's good for me because it means when I go out into the communities, hopefully we're able to use this tool a little bit more effectively. One of the great things about this is because it's GIS based, any community that already has some geospatial data, it's really easy to use this tool and incorporate it with what's already going on. So if somebody is out there working with the water conservation, some kind of development project, this model can be very easily incorporated with that data already. And again, we at NMSU can hopefully help out with any of the technical assistance that any of the communities need if they're having trouble maybe finding out where they're going to be spending some of their resources or focusing some of their efforts. So one of the most important things that this model does is it can identify areas with overdevelopment. Again, that could be used for conservation if there's some tourism, rural tourism spots that are having some kind of environmental impact that needs to be mitigated. This tool could be used for that. And it also could just be used for developing those amenities that have a potential. So some limitations in future research. Again, this is what I'm going to be doing for this next year in my position with Extension Services. Hopefully, we are going to be getting some more qualitative data, again, specific data from the communities through surveys or any kind of like expert inputs. We're going to try to get some more relevant stakeholder information. So I'm going to be going around to every county in New Mexico over the next year, collecting some of their data that we don't have at NMSU, incorporating it into our models. Hopefully we're going to be having a better estimate of the tourism potential in each county. That way the Cooperative Extension Services, again, holistically with these communities can do a better job of doing some community development. And there will be some more data that we'll be collecting along the way. Some more future research. These are things that I might be incorporating. I don't know if anybody's using these in their communities for any kind of development projects, but these are just some other methods that could be used for incorporating in this model, making it a little bit more precise. All right, so the conclusions are that here in New Mexico, I haven't found any very specific studies that use GIS or geospatial information to identify these potential resources that we have. So I want to make sure that we are doing that research. That's going to be like my main focus, and being able to use this for real-world development projects all around the state. and hopefully making sure that, again, those limited resources, especially in our rural communities, are most well spent. We get the most revenue, the most job creation. Also keeping those, again, traditional agricultural extractive industries without feeling like there's competition in New Mexico with tourism, because they can both coexist at the same time. So, thank you very much. Are there any questions?
I have a question on, you're talking about development studies along the San Juan. I live along the San Juan River, and you're talking about developing tourism along in the New Mexico side. Are you working with anybody on the Arizona side, because the Navajo Reservation goes through New Mexico and Arizona?
So not specifically, my research has been totally based in New Mexico right now as a student. Next month when I start with the Cooperative Extension Services, I am not sure which projects we have in the Navajo Nation that are cross-border. So I know that Cooperative Extension Services focuses mostly on New Mexico communities, but I know because Navajo Nation crosses the border. I don't know, to tell you the truth, and I'm hoping in the next couple of months, as I get more familiar with my new position, I get to learn about these projects, and I get to do some cooperative work with people from the Arizona side as well.
Okay, because Arizona has the most scenic route on the river.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll probably talk to you after this. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good
Good talk. Are you using any IA stuff on this?
No, I am not specifically. Yeah, I'm not. I'm more of an economist than anything else. So I'm a little bit new to geospatial analysis. I've only been using it kind of towards the end of my graduate studies. So I have not incorporated any kind of artificial intelligence or machine learning or any kind of like big data analysis. I'm kind of doing a little bit more, hopefully hands-on stuff. Again, part of cooperative extension is going out into the communities and finding out some of these variables or some of these characteristics of communities that might not be able to be seen with big data analysis. So I'm hoping to get out there and actually meet the people, meet the ranchers, meet the farmers, meet the nonprofits, meet the local community governments, and collect some of the data that AI can't necessarily see right now because it's just not available. Hopefully, maybe we'll get somebody. I don't think there's anybody in cooperative extension at NMSU that does AI analysis or that has anything like that. Maybe in the future we'll have somebody that will be able to take all the data that we're collecting and maybe run it through some kind of artificial intelligence that can help us with our models. Right now, I don't think that there's anybody that specifically does that in my department.
The other thing is, have you heard of the food, energy, and water idea?
Yeah, like the nexus, the food, energy, water nexus.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think this would be something that you could really apply to this type of research and stuff like that, because I see the smaller communities needing to be more self-sufficient, but exporting something that they can to the whole world in order to continue to maintain that self-sufficiency.
Absolutely. So even though I focus a little bit more on water, we do have people in the cooperative extension services that are pure agricultural economists or pure rural agricultural development specialists. I'm going to be focused a little bit more on water, but we do have the resources if anybody has a need for technical assistance from NMSU extension services for agriculture, for specifically water now. And we do have some energy economists as well. They're not, I don't think they're part of the cooperative extension services, but we do have people at the College of Business that work specifically with energy resources as well. So if there's any I guess assistance that NMSU can provide, we do have resources that can reach up here even to the farther away from the university.
I think the idea is trying to mold those into one group, like you say, these guys do this, these guys do this, these guys do that. how do we put them all into one package, so to speak, so that they can present something to the local community, that they can become more self-sufficient in all aspects. Municipalities, or not municipalities, local entities require a lot of input. How can we get more self-sufficiency and provide output? And that's what you're trying to work towards, and I think that's a really great idea.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm a small cog in it. It's above my pay level, but I think that there are people, at least in NMSU, that are really cognizant of making sure there's integration through all those channels: the food, energy, and water development channels.
I'd like to talk to you some more about that.
Sounds great.
Hi, I have two questions. The first, you mentioned that you're publishing some surveys to help gather qualitative data to add to the GIS analysis. Have you published those surveys yet? And the second is, for water-based recreation, are you focusing on a specific recreational use, being boating, fishing, or passive use? Are you trying to gather information on all the uses in one survey?
So the only survey I've taken part of is in Northeast New Mexico, is a business retention and expansion survey that was focused on tourism, arts, entertainment, retail, things that were not traditional rural drivers in the economy. So I only have one of those surveys that is available to me that I've worked on. As I'm transitioning from my graduate studies to a position with extension services, I'm hoping that I go out and collect some of those surveys, or I get in touch with some of the people that have done those already. That way I can compile them and have them in a database and make them available through at least my department's website, on the NMSU website. And as I go out throughout the state, I'm hoping that I can get some of these things that we don't have the manpower to do all the surveys ourselves, but I'm hoping that we're at least maybe a clearinghouse where I can start collecting some of those and have them available aggregated. So that would be the first part. And then the second part, water tourism is anything from ice fishing in the wintertime, kayaking, or literally just going out there and taking pictures of something nice. So yeah, if you go back a few slides here, one of the proxies for rural tourism, again, is just geotagged photos, and it could be river photos, lake photos, hot springs photos. It could be, whenever I'm doing some of my data collection, I'll do keywords kayaking, keywords rafting, keywords fly fishing. So it incorporates just about anything that is water-based, that is not extractive, and can be used, again, in conjunction with any of those pre-existing agricultural or ranching, farming uses that can be basically used at the same time, creating some kind of tourism revenue, hopefully, at the same time, keeping those economic drivers in the community that have been there non-competitive. So it's just anything, basically.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the questions.
Oh, I got one more here, Jason. Yeah. Let's see, from our Zoom attendees, have you considered using QGIS instead of ArcGIS?
No, because the classes they teach at NMSU teach ArcGIS. Luckily, we have the money for licenses, but I know that some of the communities that don't have it, I think QGIS is a free geospatial analysis tool, and I think that they can easily be integrated together. I don't think there's any problem taking data from one platform and using it in the other.
Okay, and then we got some questions about your model. And our question asker wasn't sure if you had mentioned this before, but what are the fixed effects in your model?
I have to get back to that.
Okay.
I don't have my package of this. This is kind of just like a skimming of the surface of what I've done. I'll get back into it. Plus, this is this is a few months old that I made this slide. I use it for another presentation. I've been working on my research, and it's kind of progressed since then. So things have changed since this is actually since I made these slides.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'll provide you with his contact info.
I think I might have my contact information. No, I don't. You could just You could probably find me. I should be on the NMSU Extension Services website here pretty soon. If you want to email me once my contact information is up there, then I can get back and I can share. Eventually, I'm going to publish this. This is part of my dissertation, so it'll be published soon.
All right. Thank you so much, Jason. Okay, well, we've come to our first break of the day. We'll be reconvening back at around 11 o'clock, where we'll hear 3 more presentations this morning before our buffet lunch. We'll hear presentations on modeling and simulating dust on snow events, hydroacoustic turbidity, surrogate measurements, and aluminum, arsenic, and lead concentrations in the Navajo Nation in the San Juan River watershed. So there's still some more burritos that are out just in the lobby area. There's also coffee, water, orange juice still available. Yeah, we'll begin our program again at 11 o'clock. Thank you. Okay, everyone, I hope you had a nice chance to stretch your legs. I'll just ask that we start making our way back to the conference area, to our seats. While you are all doing that, I'll start introducing the first of the latter half of our morning speakers. Soroj Dital received his PhD degree in atmospheric science from the University of Nevada, Reno in 2021 under the supervision of Professor Michael L. Kaplan. During his PhD research, he contributed to identifying different scale meteorological features responsible for organizing high-impact dust episodes. Currently, he's a postdoctoral researcher at the Jornada Experimental Range, New Mexico State University, working with Dr. Nicholas Webb. At the Jornada, Soroj's research focuses on modeling the impacts of climate and land cover change on dust emissions from the western United States and linking dust deposition on snow and water resources in the Colorado River Basin, funded by NASA ROSES grant. Let's see, Soroj, come on up. Let me see if I can load your presentation. Okay, does that look good? Okay, there you go.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Mark, for introducing me. Today I'm presenting our latest work on long-term trends in spring season land surface roughness and application of the WRF-CAM model in simulating dust and snow event across the southwestern United States. I'm Soroj Dital, and this is a collaborative project between the multiple institutions across the United States. I like to begin with the dust and snow and how it links with the water resources in the southwest US. So the map here shows where the dust sources are and where the snowpack regions are. The red color indicates the dust source region, and the somehow blue color represents the snowpack regions. So the southwest is a major dust source region in the map. So what happens in the spring season, specifically between March and May, the southwesterly wind transport a lot of dust from the southwest region to the Colorado Plateau, where it gonna interacts with the snow and changes the hydrological cycle. So how it looks like when dust interacts with the snow? The figure here shows the picture of when dust interacts with the snow. So what happens when dust is deposited on snow, snow albedo is going to change. So snow albedo decreases, that means it can absorb more solar energy. So when more solar energy is absorbed by the snow melt is going to accelerate, and subsequently it increases the runoff in the river. That is why this type of the research is highly relevant in this region. So I like to focus you on the figure A here. The y-axis shows the spectral albedo, and in the figure B, the y-axis shows the normalized discharge. Dust deposited on snow, it's gonna decrease the snow albedo. So when snow albedo decreases, it absorbs more solar energy and increases the runoff. If you see the figure B in the pointed by the black arrow there, and in the figure A, the pointed by the black arrow, there. So when the snow albedo decreases, we can see the runoff is increasing in the Animas River, and the same thing happens in different rivers in the Colorado Plateau. So now the question comes, can we develop a couple model that can better predict dust on snow and hydrological cycle? So if yes, how do we model all these processes? This figure shows the schematic of the different components if we want to develop the couple model from dust and snow to hydrological cycle. So there are four major parts that model has to resolve. The first one is the dust source, second one is the dust emission and transport. So basically it relates with the meteorology, how the meteorology is going to transport dust on snow region. The third part is the dust deposition, and the last part is a dust-snow interaction. So if we can make a model that can handle all these processes, we can better predict the hydrological cycle in the Colorado River Basin. So at the Hornada, we are mostly focusing on the two parts, dust source region and dust emission and transport, basically the meteorological section of the model. So I'd like to begin with the dust source region, how we are trying to understand dust source region across the Southwest. So we are typically trying to map the land surface roughness, which is a critical indicator of the aeolian processes. So we did 20 years trend analysis of the land surface roughness at 2 kilometer pixel resolution. So for the roughness analysis, we took the data from the MODIS. The mathematical term here shows the normalized surface friction velocity, which is actually gives the information of the roughness at the ground level. So the key point here is to understand when we have the high value of the normalized surface friction velocity, that means the surface roughness is decreasing. So that means the increase in wind momentum at the surface level, that increases the probability of the dust emission. So based on our analysis, what we found, declining land surface roughness across the different drylands in the Southwest. The figure here shows the 20 years trend of a normalized surface friction velocity. So the red color indicates the decrease in land surface roughness, increase in normalized surface friction velocity, whereas the green color indicates the decrease in normalized surface friction velocity, that means increase in roughness. So what is happening during the last 20 years? So the roughness is decreasing across the Mojave Desert, Southern Great Basin Desert, Central New Mexico, and in some parts of the Sonoran Deserts. So what is the practical implication of these results, and what type of the analysis we could do from this type of the MODIS product? So we can apply this type of the result for the dust mitigation and land management, as well as we can monitor the vegetation change, like some invasive species where they are, penetrating in the different regions. So this is a practical implication for the from this type of the data set. Now I like to move into the second part of our research, how we are trying to understand dust emission and dust on snow processes. We're typically using the weather research and forecasting model coupled with chemistry. So the WRF is a regional model, and it can handle the chemistry part as well. Because we are focusing on the dust on snow, the WRF, in the chemistry side, it can handle the dust emission and transport processes. So there are different types of the dust emission scheme embedded in the WRF model, and we are using the Air Force Weather Agency dust emission scheme. So in the base version of the FWA dust emission scheme, they don't have the roughness information. So what we are doing here is we are bringing MODIS data set, the roughness data set, and putting those in a FWA dust emission scheme. So we simulated two dust events, the 2013 April 16 event and 2017 March 23 event. In 2013 April 16 event, what happened, a strong dust plume was formed over the southwestern Colorado Plateau, and the dust was subsequently transported to the San Juan mountain range. At the same time, another dust plume was formed over the Farmington region, and both dust plumes were transported to the San Juan range. Whereas in the case of 2017, dust was emitted over the northern Chihuahua Desert, and it ultimately transported to the Rockies region. So the figure B and D here shows the WRF-CHEM simulation domain. For the simulation, we use the 3 nested domains having the horizontal resolution of 18.6 and 2 kilometer. And though there are different stations which we use for the assessment of the model performance. So we started to assess the model performance from the meteorological side, because the meteorology is one of the major part which is usually responsible for emitting the dust. So we assessed the 10-meter wind in the model. The figure here shows the time series of the simulated and observed 10-meter wind at different available stations across the study area. In the 2013 case, we compared the model at Flagstaff and the Sedona station. So what we see after the 13 UTC on April 16, the close correspondence between the simulated and the observed wind speeds. In the 2017 case, we took the 2 station data set, typically from the El Paso, Texas region, and one is from the Artesia, New Mexico region. We can see the close correspondence between the observed and simulated wind, and this indicates that our model was able to somehow replicate the meteorological side of the meteorological part in the simulation. So we are more confident that we can do the assessment of the dust from the WRF-CHEM model. So this slide is to show where are the this dust source region and how the dust was transported in the atmosphere. The figure A and F here shows the satellite imagery showing the dust plume transporting in the San Juan mountain range. Figure B and C shows the dust emission flux and dust load. So if we see in the figure B in the 2013 case, the dust emission flux was high, especially over the southwest Colorado Plateau, around the 14 UTC. And as the time progressed, if we see at 16 UTC in figure D and E, the dust emission flux intensified in those regions, and that gave us the high amount of the dust in the vertical load. And that ultimately gave rise to the dust plume traveling in the northeast direction towards the San Juan range, and which is somehow matches with the evolution of the dust plume in the satellite imagery. In the 2017 case, around 16 UTC on March 23, dust initially emitted over the northern Chihuahua Desert, and as time progressed, we can see the dust emission flux intensified and it widens and covering the more region. And that ultimately gave the high amount of the dust in the vertical column, and the plume is transporting in northeast direction, and which is also comparable with the evolution of the dust plume in the satellite imagery. After that, we also tried to see how the simulated aerosol optical depth is compared with the observed AOD. The left panel shows the simulated aerosol optical depth for the 2013 and 2017 case, whereas the right panel shows the dust plume observed from the MODIS. So in the case of 2013, around 1810 UTC, we can see the formation of the 2 dust plume, especially one over the Four Corners region and one over the Farmington region, and which is well captured by the MODIS. And in the 2017 case, we can see the WRF-CHEM model was able to capture the evolution of the dust plume over the northern Chihuahua Desert. So the key point here is to understand the WRF-CHEM model was able to replicate the evolution of the aerosol optical depth compared with the satellite imagery. We also tried to see how the PM10, especially during the dust event, is compared with our simulation. In the case of 2013, we don't have a PM10 station in the dust transport path region. So I typically pull up the data for the 2017 case. The figure A and B here shows the evolution of the PM10 at West Mesa, New Mexico, and the Anthony, New Mexico region. So around 17 to 18 UTC, we can see when the southwesterly wind was intensified, it increased the dust emission in the surface that subsequently increases the PM10 evolution. And we can see the close correspondence between the simulated and observed PM10. So the key point here I want to emphasize is the temporal evolution of the PM10 is well captured by the WRF-Chem simulation. Now with this, I like to put summary and conclusion based on what we have from our research. From the long-term trend analysis, what we are seeing decreasing land surface roughness in many drylands across the southwest US. So how we could apply this modest albedo data set based on our research, we can see that it can be applied for the roughness monitoring, dust mitigation, land management, vegetation change, etc. From the WRF-Chem simulation, what we have seen, the WRF-Chem model, if we have a good dust emission scheme, it can use for the dust episode forecasting purposes. Now we have a pretty much understanding on the dust source part and the dust emission and transport. Now we are going to bring dust and snow part and the dust and snow interaction from the other groups working at different institutions. So which is an ongoing part. So once we finish, we hope to believe that our couple model is going to tackle all the dust emission, transport, deposition, and hydrological side inside the model. So with this, these are some references that I used. Finally, I like to acknowledge different institutions. I like to thank the conference organizer giving me the opportunity to present our work. I like to thank all the research members involved in this project. And this project was funded by the NASA ROSES grant, so I like to acknowledge the NASA here. For the WRF-Chem simulation, we use the NASA and the USDA SciNet computing resources, so I like to acknowledge USDA as well. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I will be more than happy to answer them. I have listed few papers of interest that mostly focus on the dust and snow project. If you like to get more ideas what we are doing, you can refer to those projects. If you want to get more understanding and knowledge what we are doing, you can contact me in those email address. Thank you so much.
Rounding out the end of our morning program, we'll have two USGS presenters. First, I'd like to welcome Jeb Brown up to the stage. Jeb is a hydrologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, New Mexico Water Science Center. He earned his undergraduate degree in biology and his master's degree in water resources from the University of New Mexico. Jeb works on a variety of issues related to fate and transport of fluvial sediments. His research is focused on streams with high sediment suspended concentrations, developing innovative surrogate methods for monitoring sediment in shifting sand channels, and integrating biological and chemical studies with sediment transport. Jeb, thank you so much for presenting.
I feel like there's been plenty of NMSU people up here, so UNM needs a little representation today. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate the organizers for putting this on together. We've been here for many years and appreciate the good work that you all have done on getting information out to the other scientists and the public and the managers in this region, doing a lot of important work. So I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues working on this project, Johanna Blake, Grady Ball, Justin Nichols, and Brian Resin, a lot of folks that have come together to make this work possible. Also our cooperators, the funding agency, the US EPA, for providing the funding for the project, and the New Mexico Environment Department for really championing the cause of, funding this project, especially Dennis McQuillan, who was one of the big proponents of this project, and we've really appreciated his work with us over the years, and he's, I'm speaking for our office, greatly missed. So I've presented on this before, but I have some data finally to show you some preliminary results, and so I'm excited to show some of those data here. We're still collecting samples now. We've been collecting samples every 3 days over the spring snowmelt. We have a lot of really good data to validate our model, to build and validate our model. And we're setting up now for the monsoon season coming up in July and August and September. And then that will conclude the data collection portion of this project, and we'll continue the analysis through next fiscal year. So here's a picture, a black and white photo that I took of our team when we installed these instruments. We installed some water quality instruments at this site. The site I'm going to be talking about is on the Animas River, the Cedar Hill USGS stream gauge, and that's a couple of us sitting there at the side of the site where we installed the instrumentation. So this specific project is looking at providing temporally rich data about estimations of suspended sediment concentrations and metals concentrations. So when I say temporally rich, I'm talking about 15-minute data, kind of the traditional USGS stream gauge kind of water quality sonde data, real-time data. Also, another goal that we're trying to look at was whether or not it's possible to have some of those real-time values of suspended metals transmitted in real time. So if you've ever done any rafting or recreating on the rivers, you know that USGS provides real-time stream flow data. And so some of the work that we've done in surrogate techniques for suspended sediment is providing real-time estimations of suspended sediment concentration using some surrogate techniques. And there's a lot of there can be some uncertainty around those, so displaying the uncertainty of our estimations is important to understand as well. But whether or not we can show these in real time will depend on how good the models look and which elements are important and which ones we can predict well. So the study area here, if you're not familiar with the area, this is the Animas River watershed. To orient yourself, there's the four corners of Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. And on the subset image on the right, image B, you can see the Animas watershed from the San Juan River confluence all the way up to the headwaters, where we've seen a great presentation by Peter earlier today. The specific site location I'm talking about is at the Star, which is just at the border of New Mexico and Colorado. That is the USGS stream gauge, Animas River at Cedar Hill. So everything that we're doing in this study is located at that gauge. All of our instrumentation and sampling is occurring at that one location. So a quick overview of surrogate measurement. We do this with a lot of things when we either can't, or it's difficult, or it's expensive to quantify something. We often measure something else in its place. So stream flow is a classic example of this. So we collect all the gauge data I talked about earlier, provided by the USGS and other agencies, is all really just a surrogate from stage values. So we collect stage data in our gauges. That's what we collect at the field, and that's transmitted out from the site. But what we do is we go out periodically and make discharge measurements at a single point in time and correlate that to how high the water was at that measurement. And plotting those over time over a range of the stage in the river allows us to create essentially a regression. So that stage discharge figure up on the upper right is a rating that we then use to infer what the stream flow is at any given stage. So this is a great example of what a surrogate might look like. For the purposes of this project that I'm working on, we're looking at using turbidity as a surrogate for suspended sediment concentration. This is something that we've had great success with using in the USGS, and other agencies have used it as well. In the upper right is our techniques and methods paper that documents the approach and the assumptions in using turbidity as a surrogate for suspended sediment concentration. On the left-hand side are the two instruments we're using as surrogates at this site. So the Analyte NEP 5000 is an instrument that has an upper range that's pretty high. We can get a lot of high concentrations of suspended sediment concentrations in the Animas River and some of the ephemeral channels. So we wanted an instrument that would function at some of the higher concentrations. We also included the Turner turbidity sensor because the manufacturer of another instrument I'll talk about in 1 second they really recommended this as pairing with their instrument. And we kind of had our doubts whether or not we needed to use that, and I think we don't, but at the time we didn't want to have any major holes in our analysis later on, so we installed that instrument as well. And this is an example of what some of those data look like. You can see the turbidity trace here from last year. This is a plot of real-time turbidity data at the site. One of the limitations of using turbidity as a surrogate for suspended sediment concentration is that it is generally a better predictor for the fine sediments. So if you have silts and clays, turbidity handles that pretty well. But it struggles when you start to transport more fine sands. And if you're familiar with the Animas River, it can transport fine sands, especially at higher flows and spring snow melt. But then, conversely, during the monsoon season, it transports a lot of fine material as well. So we wanted to look at using hydroacoustic data as well. And the challenge with, we've also had great success with hydroacoustics as a surrogate for suspended sediment. The techniques and methods paper for that is on the upper right, and it lays out the approach as well in that document. One of the limitations, though, with using the acoustic instrumentation is on the right. You can see that white instrument. That's a side looker, and they're pretty big. It's about the size of a shoebox, kind of a big clunky thing, and it requires quite a bit of depth in the channel. And in a lot of our rivers here, we don't get enough depth to really profile across an entire channel with that instrument. And so a new instrument came out, manufactured by Sequoia Scientific, called the LIST ABS. It's essentially, it looks like a sonde. It's a very small profile device. And it only profiles that volume of water right out in front of the instrument, kind of like a turbidity instrument would do. But we can operate that in a lot lower depth of water. So it operates at an 8 megahertz frequency and gives us the same acoustic backscatter signal we would get from a side looker, but it's just at one point. However, because of its small sampling size, small sampling volume, and the 8 megahertz, it's more sensitive in the sands fraction. So whereas turbidity was more sensitive to the fine materials, this instrument is more sensitive to the sands. And so combining their powers together, the manufacturer calls this super turbidity. You can see the paired Turner turbidity sensor there next to the ABS. And so essentially what we're doing is we're taking those, both of those surrogate instruments and then regressing against suspended sediment concentration to get a more robust estimation of suspended sediment. And that's what the hydroacoustic data looks like during that same period. And I should have shown some examples of this, but you can see during certain times of the year where those signals will shift, where turbidity might not respond as well, but the acoustic instrument does. The signal from that is much higher than what turbidity can see. And so we feel like this is a great pairing of instruments to get at a better estimation of sediment. Our calibration data set includes collecting physical samples at the site. This is one of our field hydrologists collecting a sample co-located next to where the instrumentation's mounted from that first picture on the opening slide. So that's done monthly and sometimes bi-monthly, and during periods of time where we want a little more data, some samples collected more often, we have an ISCO automated sampler collecting those samples there as well. And we have a set of samples sent to the New Mexico Water Science Center Sediment Lab. They're analyzed for particle size and concentration for suspended sediment. And then another set shipped off to our USGS Minerals Lab in Denver that are analyzed for the trace metals data. This is a photograph of our site. This is at the Animas River Cedar Hill Gauge. And you can see this giant bedrock outcrop here, and the PVC pipe extending down into the left into the channel is what houses our different water quality sondes. There's a multi-parameter sonde there as well from a different project, but it also has another turbidity sensor, has an XO2 turbidity sensor and multi-parameter data, which we're also incorporating into our regression model. So you can see this is looking downstream. You can see a point of diversion downstream there. You can see the radar, which is just poking off the edge of that little wing wall. The ISCO automated sampler is mounted there, and the intake for that ISCO automated sampler is co-located with the instrumentation down in the river. So for our regression analysis and what variables and predictors that we're including into the model, we have, I've listed them here, so suspended sediment concentration and particle size, of course, and the surrogate data also, turbidity and the acoustic data are included. Of course, also the different trace metals, and early on we focused on some of the bigger ones, but we've looked at all of them just to see which ones might regress better than others. And I've got some figures to show some of those scatter plots in this presentation. We're also including stream flow and seasonality. And then, like I said, we have that multi-parameter water quality SON there as well, which includes pH, specific conductance, temperature. Lastly, we're including some upstream data in the watershed to look at if we can include some component of stream flow source during these different events to help increase the predictive capability of our model. So some of the things we're looking at is some of the gauges upstream and some historical precipitation data to see if we can build a machine learning model to inform us of what percentage of upstream flow came from a certain region, which might help us to tease out the relationship in sediment concentration and metals. So the next few slides, I have a lot of these scatter plots, and so we'll just move through them kind of quickly. On the first, the suspended sediment concentrations are on the y-axis, and then the metal that we're looking at will be on the x-axis. On the right-hand side, there's a legend there that shows the different colors for the samples, and we had differentiated these by falling stage, rising stage, or a stable stage. And this is to look at any hysteresis effects that might be affecting our relationship. And generally, we're not seeing a lot of effect. We're not seeing hysteretic effects. So here's chromium. You can see a pretty decent relationship between chromium and suspended sediment concentration. So all of these that I'm showing, I've cherry-picked the good ones, so this all looks pretty good. Here's cobalt. Cobalt also has a pretty good linear relationship. Copper has a little bit more scatter, but you can still see that it is linear related. Iron also does well. Aluminum, which is kind of to be expected. It's a lot of the fine particles are aluminosilicate, so we expect to find aluminum hanging around. And we've got barium here. Lead also looking really, really good with suspended sediment concentration. Manganese, nickel, even potassium, and titanium, and lastly uranium. So these are all, this is just our data set from data we've collected in 2022. We have samples collected over the winter and spring, but those haven't been sent out yet, or haven't been sent back from the lab. The lab kind of takes about 6 months to get data back from them, so some of these figures can be updated as soon as we get our data back from the lab. Some of the elements that we cannot predict very well include lithium, calcium, magnesium, molybdenum, rubidium, sodium, strontium, sulfur, and zinc. These are some of the other elements we were interested in looking at, particularly zinc, and we can't predict them very well currently, just looking at a basic regression. So we're incorporating a machine learning model approach to test whether or not we can estimate concentrations using the higher frequency SON data. So we're looking at using those surrogate methods for doing a better job of predicting the different metals that we've listed here. And so two of the approaches we're using is using support vector machine and XGBoost. And my colleague, Justin Nichols in our office has done a fantastic job looking into this component of the project. So we've first gone through both approaches, training a model, training the algorithm on our 2022 data set, and then we anticipate using our 2023 data to test the predictive capabilities of the model. And here's one, I wanted to include this. This was a figure that Justin sent me yesterday, showing kind of an improved, how the support vector machine can improve just standard regression. So on the left-hand side, you see this is a figure similar to what I showed with the other elements. This is lithium, which does not, it's kind of a weak correlation between sediment and lithium. But if we include the other predictors in a support vector machine model, on the right-hand side, you can see that tuned model. And it looks a lot better. The fit looks a lot better on this one. And so this was the support vector machine algorithm, and then here's the XGBoost algorithm, which shows an improved predictive capability on this as well. So now we're looking on the right-hand side, the predicted versus observed values. So lastly, I wanted to show what an example of the final results would look like. So, we can do all of these things and maybe predict some metals, but what's the point of that? One of the things I think is very valuable is that if, let's say, we can do a good job of predicting aluminum or lead, then we have 15-minute values of what that looks like over an entire year, which can be really valuable to see how the metal transport behaves in this watershed. The timing and the peaks of some of these concentrations would be really valuable. And so this would probably end up being what the final product would look like with some prediction intervals, so you can see some of the uncertainty in the model. And as well as the physical samples that are collected. In this example, that would be those red dots where historically those are the only times of the year that we've had any information about what metals concentrations look like. So even though there might be a larger uncertainty, there certainly is uncertainty surrounding these predictions, as opposed to a traditional physical sample. We can't replace that method for sure, but it would allow us to infer a lot more information about greater processes in the watersheds. Also, if we can, like I had mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, if we can figure out any of the elements that predict well in real time, providing that information for downstream users and managers in real time would be a valuable component of the project as well. That's all I have. I'll be here today and tomorrow, and happy to talk with any of you. If you have any other predictor variables you think I should include, I'd love to hear from you. And happy to talk and answer any questions you might have now.
I had two questions. One you probably said, but I missed it. Are you predicting dissolved metals or total metals here?
That's a good question. I didn't mention it, so you didn't. No, sorry. Because the turbidity and acoustic sensors are only seeing particulate matter, we're not able to predict dissolved. So we can't predict the dissolved phase of any of these metals. Early on in the project, we did collect paired samples to look at what the contribution of the dissolved phase is. We haven't gotten into those results yet, but we'll be publishing those to show how much of that, that fraction is in the dissolved phase.
Okay, my other question is about calibration. Obviously these regressions would be specific to particular water bodies or stretches of water bodies, and so what is the kind of spatial intensity of calibration that would need to happen to deploy this more widely?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, a lot of times, I'm just thinking from the the sediment side, the sediment concentration side, a lot of these are site-specific models that aren't very transferable across other sites. So I don't know. The answer is I don't know how transferable they are. I would be really, I would love to try it, but I don't know that I'd put a lot of weight into it without some site-specific information for that model.
Thank you.
Yeah, good questions. Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation. I wasn't sure, you've probably thought about this, so I was curious your thoughts about organic matter, now things like algae and other things that could affect turbidity. Do you see that playing out in any of your data?
Ooh, that's a good thing to include. So when USGS presents results of suspended sediment concentration, that includes all of that. So it includes whatever diatoms, organic matter, everything that is in suspension gets lumped in. And we've had discussions about this in the past. What does it really mean to be suspended sediment concentration? So there's that component in the sediment transport. But then what does that mean to relating to metals even further? I don't know. It seems like it's a question that we don't know, and I can't suss that out from the data, but it's something important to include, and that's a thing that I'll include to look more into in the literature and how that might affect. Yeah, good point. Thank you.
I got a question here from Melissa via Zoom. Were you seeing concentrations of metals in the high range enough to be of concern? If they were below those thresholds, do you think your model would hold at higher concentrations?
I couldn't hear you, Mark. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Could you use the microphone, please?
I know, it's like,
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. I'm getting old.
I got the question right. Okay, so, so were you, were you seeing concentrations of metals in the range high enough to be of concern? If they were below the thresholds, do you think your model would hold at higher concentrations?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. We do have some higher, I don't know how many of them are above certain thresholds. We haven't gotten that deep yet, but there are definitely some higher, we'll say outliers. They're not outliers, they're just high values. They're good values. And so our data are kind of skewed at the higher end, and that's something that we need to address. But I think looking at some of the scatter plots, if you zoom in on the lower end, it looks good, and then you start bringing in some of the higher, really important components. This is when a lot of the metals are being transported. It's some of the most important parts. Then the models start to have a problem struggling with that. A lot of the other models, sediment surrogates, it's the low end where we have a little more uncertainty, but with some of these elements, it looks like the upper end might have more uncertainty, which is concerning to me because that's where a lot of the big metals are being, a lot of the higher metals loading is being transported.
All right, thank you, Jeb.
All right, thanks, Mark.
Okay, and now for our final presenter of this morning, before we get to our lunch, we have Christina Ferguson. Christina Ferguson, she started with the USGS as a student in 2016. In May 2020, she graduated with her master's degree in geology and geochemistry. Her main focus at work is on water quality as it relates to water-rock interactions in surface water, groundwater, and underground cave water. Let me see here. Okay. Thank you, Christina.
You want to stand up there? I'll just stand here. Good morning. I will go quickly. I know you're all hungry for lunch. And, this is just to pass the time until we get there, right? So I'm going to talk to you about aluminum, arsenic, and lead concentrations in the Navajo Nation portion of the San Juan River in the Four Corners. That's it. Don't push that button. Okay. What am I doing wrong? Oh, okay, sorry. So a little bit of background on this study. This is part of a large study that we're doing in cooperation with Navajo Nation EPA, because they have found exceedances of aluminum, arsenic, and lead during routine sampling, not necessarily during, the Gold King mine event, just routine sampling. So the question is, where are these metals coming from? Could they be natural, like part of the geology, the rocks dissolving and transporting these metals? Are they products of oil and gas or mining activities in the area? What about urbanization? All of our cars driving around and the oil and grease gets into the water. Illegal trash dumping or agriculture. Sometimes there's flowback from the ag fields that might carry metals. So to look at it, we established sites at over 40 tributaries to the San Juan River, from Navajo Lake to Mexican Hat. Because these are ephemeral tributaries, because they are so far away and so far away from anything else, I don't know if you guys know, but it's the middle of nowhere out there. So we had to come up with a novel sampling technique. So what we came up with is this lovely instrument that we have called the SEDChem gauge. And the gauge sits in the stream bed parallel to water. The intake hoses, which are these, I don't think I have a pointer, are the two little dots are perpendicular to flow so that water can go in. We collect the water samples in two bottles. Also attached to these is a pressure transducer in the very long tube for those streams that don't have a USGS gauge. And then we also have a sediment collecting tube, which is kind of on the bottom. That's for the suspended sediment. I'm not going to go into any more detail. We have a beautiful poster over here, plugged for the poster session, and you can get more details on that, the poster. So instead, I'm going to jump right into what we did. So here's the site map. Today for this talk, I'm just focusing on areas from the Hogback down to Mexican Hat. Although we do have sites upstream of that, I'm not talking about those today. So what we're looking at for the color scheme here, all of the circles in blue, those are San Juan River samples, and they start from light blue and go to dark blue at the end. And then tributary samples are all triangles, and there'll be greens in New Mexico and shades of yellow and red in Utah. The very first thing we're going to talk about is the base flow. We did a base flow sampling trip in February of 2021 just along the San Juan River, just to see what we were working with. All of the water chemistry results I'm presenting today are the total fraction, so unfiltered. All of the gunk is in there. So we're looking at this graph from east on the, you guys are the other way, on the right-hand side and west on the left-hand side. That's Hogback to Mexican Hat. On the east side of the graph is the concentrations. Everything's going to be presented in micrograms per liter, or parts per billion. And this first one we're looking at is aluminum concentrations. I also show on here the EPA secondary MCL of 200 micrograms per liter for aluminum. And as you can see, even in base flow conditions, the San Juan River exceeds that at almost every site. Next, we're going to look at arsenic, same in the base flow in February of 2021. This time, the concentration for arsenic, the scale goes up to 1.5 milligrams per liter, or micrograms per liter, excuse me, which is way below the EPA MCL of 10 micrograms per liter in these base flow samples. And finally, for the base flow samples, we're looking at the lead concentrations. See, the scale for the concentrations of lead in the San Juan only goes up to 6 micrograms per liter. And the EPA MCL for lead is 15 micrograms per liter in the water. And all of these sites are below that in base flow conditions. But now let's see what the tributaries do. Let's see what happens when it rains cats and dogs. Because that's what it did. A couple of years. We have samples here from August of 2021, and I'm showing aluminum concentrations. Again, the circles are all the samples along the river, and the triangles are the tributaries that contribute to the river flow. We have the EPA MCL of 200 micrograms per liter as a line all the way at the bottom of the scale, because the scale now goes up to 400,000 parts per billion. whereas in the base flow it was 12,000 parts per billion. So you see a huge jump in concentrations. And all of the San Juan River sites are, again, above the EPA MCL, and most of the tributary sites are also above the EPA MCL of 200 micrograms per liter. So let's look at arsenic in August of 2021. Now we see a big change in the concentrations, whereas before the EPA MCL of 10 micrograms per liter wasn't even on the graph. Now we can see that about half the tributary sites exceed this concentration, but only one or two of the samples from along the river meet or exceed the 10 micrograms per liter concentration. The other thing to note is the scale here. We're looking at a scale that goes up to 120 micrograms per liter, and the base flow, it only went up to 1.5. So for lead in August of 2021, we have the EPA MCL of 15 micrograms per liter at the bottom of the graph. And if you remember in the base flow samples, it wasn't even on the graph, it was off of it. We can see here that all of the river samples now exceed the EPA MCL of 15 micrograms per liter, and the majority of the tributary samples also exceed that regulatory limit. The other thing is the scale. We're at 350 micrograms per liter on this scale, and in the background we were at 6. So we see a huge overall increase in these concentrations when you get some flow from these tributaries. So let's jump ahead another year. We're going to look at August of 2022 with these same sites and the same metals. So here are the aluminum concentrations of August of 2022. I don't know if you can see it or not, but their EPA MCL red line is almost at the bottom of this graph, because now the scale goes up to 1.6 million micrograms per liter, which is 400 times what it was, some crazy number like that. All of the sites, again, exceed the EPA secondary MCL of 200 micrograms per liter, except for 2 little tributary sites that had non-detects. So for arsenic, also in August of 2022, you see the EPA MCL of 10 micrograms per liter is all the way at the bottom of this graph. The scale now goes up to 600 micrograms per liter, with this little bad boy setting the bar over here at Salt Creek Wash. We had 596 micrograms per liter of arsenic, which is fantastic. The other thing to note here is that you can kind of see the influence of the arsenic concentrations from the tributaries. You can see their influence on the river. So as we get some higher concentrations in the tributaries downstream, you can see a jump in the concentrations along the river. So finally, lead concentrations in August of 2022. The EPA MCL of 15 micrograms per liter is shown all the way at the bottom of this graph, which now has a scale that goes up to 3,200 micrograms per liter. And if you remember, the base flow was 6. You can see that all of these samples, except for one river sample and a couple of tribs, exceed the EPA MCL of 15 micrograms per liter. So that's it for the data results, but let's talk about those samplers. Did they work? Well, we had some big flows, as you guys are probably aware, and we had some samplers that collected trees or collected mud. The second figure on your right there with the white arrow is showing that water sample bottle is mostly sediment. We collected mostly mud that day. That's Cottonwood Wash. The other thing that we had is big flows completely removing our samplers. We had buried samplers, so this one that's buried, that's at Sogsy Wash. So of course we didn't collect a water sample from that flow. So some of our data have these gaps where we had water, but we weren't able to collect the water. The other one is with the yellow circle, this is Lime Creek, and that sampler, we had to walk a quarter mile downstream to recover it after it got washed away. And so of course there was no water sample there. And finally, this is what we had expected to happen. We expected that we would put these samplers out and there would be flow, but it wouldn't be enough. And that's what happened in this case. This is Sita Wash. You can see the kind of dirt line from the water, and it's below the intake. So while there was water and a contribution to the San Juan River, we did not collect that water and get those analyses. And And that's about it. We've got some more chemistry results we're waiting from the lab. We're going to look at the sediment chemistry as those results come in. We have started on a series of journal articles to talk about all of the things. And our future work discussions right now are including outreach along the Navajo Nation. So that was speedy. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Same question that was asked of you before, or asked of Jeb. Are the data you showing total or dissolved?
Yeah, they're all total. They're all unfiltered. Okay, I'll take that as my cue. Thank you.
Okay, well, we've wrapped up our morning program a little bit early. It looks like the catering staff is just putting the final touches on the food for our lunch. So let's see, I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping before we all file out for lunch. Let's see here. I think it'd be a good chance right now to give a big thanks to the conference planning committee members. It takes a village to organize one of these conferences, and so I really want to give my thanks on behalf of the Water Resources Research Institute to these people. We have Steve Austin, Navajo Nation EPA, Johanna Blake from the U.S. Geological Survey, Aurelia Bridge from the San Juan Soil and Water Conservation District, Carol Clower, Lee Hammond Water Users Association, Anthony Edwards from the Bonita Peak Mining District CAG, our director, Sam Fernald, Sarah Gerlitz-Peck of the Office of the Natural Resources Trustee, Shelley Lemon, New Mexico Environment Department, Kevin Lombard from the NMSU Ag Science Center at Farmington, Yesenia Lugo Hams from U.S. EPA Region 6, our NMWRI's program manager, Carolina Mijares, Talon Newton from the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources, Alyssa Richmond from Animas Environmental Services, and NMWRI's program specialist, Jeanette Torres, who is one of our check-in staff out front. So I just want to say big thanks to all of those people. Thanks as well to the two organizations who are kind of co-hosting our field trip tomorrow to visit restoration projects in the lower Animas River. This is through the San Juan Soil and Water Conservation District and the New Mexico Environment Department. So for those of you who have signed up, thank you so much. They are, and we are really excited to show off some of this work that's been completed on the river. And with that, so what I'll do is I'll ask. It looks like the best way to do this people will exit through those doors and then go through the buffet and then come back this way. Oh, question, Jason?
How do we know if we signed up for the field trip? I don't remember.
Let's see. I can check for you, Jason. I believe you should have gotten a confirmation email, but I'll be sending out another confirmation to anyone who's signed up today. Just like we said, to let people know, like, if they find out they aren't able to attend or something's come up, they can let us know either via email or letting our front desk staff know, and that way we can get a hold of some people who are on the waiting list and give them a spot. But yeah, I'll check Jason on yours, and I'll be sending out resending a confirmation email to everyone. So, but yeah, I hope that everyone enjoys our lunch today. We'll be restarting our afternoon session at 1:30. Wanted to give plenty of time for everyone to chat and socialize. About midway through is when I'll be showing the video that I had been considering showing this morning that I'm really excited about. But yeah, everyone can exit out through there, go through the line, come back in through here, and yeah, enjoy the lunch. We'll be beginning the afternoon here with a presentation on the implementation of a water lease agreement for fish habitat improvement in the San Juan Basin. And we'll be hearing from Colleen Cunningham of the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission, Jacob Mazzone of Hickory Apache Nation Department of Game and Fish, and Joe Trungle from the Nature Conservancy. And I believe, Colleen, you're going to be presenting first? Yes. Okay. Let me pull up your presentation. Here we go. Okay.
And how do I advance it?
Oh, you can just use this one here to advance,
Okay.
or if you need to, you can use that.
Okay. So I'm Colleen Cunningham, the Environmental Coordinator with the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our Hickory Apache Nation Water Lease Project. But I'm going to be pretty quick so that I leave plenty of room for Joe and Jacob, who are going to do the heavy lifting on this presentation. This was our first year of implementing the project, and it was quite an interesting year with all of the variability coming out of a 21-year drought into a good water year. Kind of changed our dynamic a little bit and made us be a little bit more adaptive in our thinking. So this was a first of its kind agreement between two sovereigns. So the Hickory Apache Nation, the state of New Mexico, and our third partner was the nonprofit, the Nature Conservancy. So we obtained water for up to 10 years from the nation through a lease agreement. So 3 parties to the lease agreement: the nation, the Interstate Stream Commission, and TNC. New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission obtained the permit from our state engineer's office to release up to 20,000 acre-feet of annually from Navajo Reservoir into the San Juan River beginning in 2023. So that's up to 20,000 feet annually for 10 years. And all of this is based on available funding, which we're all still working really hard to get. We've got funding from the state legislature. We also have quite a bit of private donation funding that came in through TNC. And we also got a grant, as Sarah mentioned, from the Office of the Natural Resources Trustee for related to the Gold King mine settlement. So we have some money going forward for future years, but still looking to be able to fund the full release amount for the full 10-year period. And the lease partners are really committed to being able to fund this fully. So the water lease project, we talked about water being released from the reservoir into the San Juan River in New Mexico. And the way that we can do this is through the Strategic Water Reserve, which was a vehicle that allowed the Interstate Stream Commission to purchase this lease. And so there are 2 designated purposes for the Strategic Water Reserve. One is for interstate compact compliance, which that's the main theme of my agency. And the second is for management for protected species. So one thing we emphasize is that this release of water from Navajo Reservoir is not a new stress on the system. It was water that was previously diverted by PNM for the San Juan Generating Station. And we were really looking for ways to use this water to provide the most benefit for the 2 endangered species in the San Juan, the Colorado pike minnow and the razorback sucker. And it says threatened here for razorback sucker, but that's actually not quite true. It's been proposed for downlisting, but it's not final. And so here is a figure showing our location in the reservoir and then the basin. And with that, I'll turn it over to Joe.
Thanks, Colleen. Again, my name's Joe Trungell. I'm a freshwater scientist with the Nature Conservancy. Really happy to be here today. So I'm going to talk about the process we went through to think about how best to use this water that is made available through this lease. And how we worked with experts to make decisions about the best use of the water, and then Jacob will come up and talk about what we're going to do moving forward. Oops. So the permit for this water lease came through last fall, and at that time we had pretty good ideas about some uses of the water, but we didn't have a real concrete plan of exactly how we were going to use it, what we were going to do to monitor the effectiveness of its use. So we set out some goals for ourselves around November of last year, and try to develop a process to determine the best use of the water. Part of this thinking, we're also thinking about how we would use it in different kinds of years, maybe not the same way every year. So we thought through a number of alternatives. We talked about developing a monitoring plan to evaluate the effectiveness of the water in meeting our goals and in helping with the recovery of these endangered fish. And we continue to work on long-term funding and other types of projects and ways that we can continue to work collaboratively. So, again, the approach was really to establish a technical team that was made up primarily of Colleen, Jacob Mazzone, myself, some outside consultants, and a few other people to help us think through this process. And what we did is we created a list of questions that we then solicited input from about 14 or 15 experts within the basin, primarily people who serve on the San Juan Recovery Implementation Program or are contractors to that program, people with on-the-ground experience on the river to help us think through what our options might be. We also worked very closely with the Bureau of Reclamation to think through the process of the actual implementation. How is the water going to be released from Navajo Dam? How are we going to account for what portion of it is part of this lease? How does it work within the other operating rules and decisions about how to provide flows for endangered species? And sort of at the end of this process, in December, January, we made a decision about how we were going to use the water this year and how we might monitor things moving forward. So I'm going to kind of talk through that decision process and what we looked at. So when we talked to these 14 experts, we really thought about three potential options for using this water. The first one would be to use the water for a very short duration high flow pulse event in the early part of the year, in January through May period, where we might release 3,000 CFS for a couple of days to clean the cobble beds that are important for spawning of these endangered fish. This is a desirable potential option because it's all before the irrigation season happens. It's an easy one to implement. But we also heard from the experts that this is not really the most critical bottleneck in the recovery of these species. We are seeing spawning happening in the river already. So we could provide some benefit with providing these flows in this period, but it was probably not the top need. The second thing we thought about was trying to use this water to supplement the spring peak release that is intended to occur through the recovery program and working with the Bureau of Reclamation. And the idea here is to get 8,000 to 10,000 CFS in the Four Corners area for a week to 10 days to create the habitat conditions necessary for the rearing of these fish. So moves this sand through the system, reconnects backwater areas, and provides that kind of habitat. The challenge with this option is that 20,000 acre feet, though a lot of water, is not a sufficient amount of water to release 5,000 CFS for 21 days. So it's a piece of the puzzle, but we couldn't do it all on our own. The third option was to think about using this water to supplement base flows in the summertime. And we were surprised to hear, I think, or I was at least surprised to hear how many of the experts thought that this was really while everyone recognized the peak flow is the really critical missing piece, there was a lot of discussion on If we could elevate the summer base flows, maybe we can connect more backwater spawning habitat areas and see a better response. That's the real critical missing piece on the recovery, especially for razorback sucker, is we see spawning, but we don't see recruitment from the from the larval to the juvenile life stages. So what happens is these larval fish drift into backwater areas where they're able to grow and feed and mature into a juvenile fish, and that's not really happening right now. And so the idea is, if we can connect more backwater areas, we may see a better response. So, after talking through this with all of these experts, bringing it to the San Juan Recovery Program and discussing it with them, the decision was made by the Interstate Stream Commission that we would use this water to augment a spring peak flow release in very specific circumstances where we could really help that happen, or we can add to what is already going on through the recovery program. But we wouldn't probably do this as a standalone effort by ourselves. So if the recovery program wasn't going to make a peak release that year, it wouldn't have made sense for us to try to make that with this water. What we would do then is use the water to augment these summer base flows, thinking about potentially increasing flows sort of from now for a couple of months by 200 CFS, and then monitor and see if we can see the benefits of that for connecting backwater areas. Turns out this year was really interesting, right? We ended up getting a lot of snowpack, even though the storage in Navajo Reservoir wasn't enough to kind of meet the decision tree that is established. The recovery program and the Bureau decided they would do a spring peak release, and we decided that the best use of this water for this year would be to add a few days to that spring peak release. So that's what happened actually last week. And someone mentioned earlier, Sarah mentioned earlier, being at the event yesterday where we brought everybody together, and this really novel approach actually got water in the river, and we are hoping to see some benefit from that. So this is what we're seeing, and I apologize, you probably can't see those slides, but the graph on the right is the release from Navajo Reservoir at the Archuleta gauge. You can see that they stepped up from somewhere around 400 or 500 CFS up to almost a little over 4,000 CFS. The last few days of that were the water from this lease, and they've been stepping down. I think they're releasing about 2,000 right now. The graph on the left is the flow at the Four Corners gauge, where the intention is to try to get 10,000 CFS for 5 days or 8,000 CFS for 10 days. We were able to meet the 8,000 target, but the Animas came off a little slow this year, and we weren't able to, although we timed it to hit the peak, we weren't able to see that 10,000 target met. With that, I'll introduce Jacob to talk about where we're going next.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jacob Mazzone, and as Joe said and Colleen before, I'm the fisheries biologist for the Hickory Apache Nation. So what Joe and Colleen just brought us through is our process up into releasing the water, and the water being released just a few weeks ago. And I think what's really important to know is this, as Joe said, is a complicated system. We have multiple gauges, Bureau of Reclamation, multiple water users, water uses, recreation, agriculture, many things. So what we hope to learn from this process, going back almost 2 years now, really in the planning stages, is how are we going to implement this? What are the practical matters related to the release? And in desk exercises, you can start to think you know everything, but until you actually start releasing water and talking to folks in the process of the water you're developing through the winter, you really need practical experience. So we hope to learn about implementation. We have learned a lot, and there's still a lot to learn. We're in the process of developing a study design using an adaptive management approach where we monitor and incorporate what we learn into subsequent years' decisions. And what that is going to look like is, in the San Juan River, we have the 2 endangered fish, and we have the San Juan River Recovery Implementation Program. A huge amount of data is collected on these species every year, and has been since 1991 probably, when the razorback sucker was listed as endangered. What we need to do and what we decided to do is use data that's already collected, use new data sources, and bring that all together to make decisions on flows and physical distribution of the habitats that might be important to these fish, as well as the biological stuff. Like I said, I'm a fish biologist, so this is the only part I know anything about in the grand scheme of things, is larval and young of year persistence in the backwaters. As a biologist, we really are interested in our ability to have more of these fish, as Joe indicated, recruit from larval to young of year to adult fish. Right now we have plenty of adults in the system, but we are not seeing that integral step of them self-sustaining. With our monitoring program, you can see, as I indicated, backwaters are important, and on the right-hand side of the presentation here, you'll see a backwater on July 8th of 2021 at 507 CFS, and just a month or so later at 370, and the quality and the size of that backwater and how that might affect fish rearing in it. It's hypothesized that the availability and the quality of these backwater habitats is what's really limiting our juvenile recruitment. We think we know, and the hydrologists, like I said, I'm a fish biologist, indicate that these high spring peak flows are essential for maintaining these habitats, but they can be filled in by summer spates like monsoon, and they need to be maintained by flows periodically. Some backwaters become disconnected at very low flows. Some backwaters maintain throughout the year at all flow conditions that we've seen. And this monitoring program is really attempting to use what we know and build upon it. We don't know everything about every backwater. They come and go. They are transient in nature in many instances. How we're going to utilize our monitoring program, what technology we're going to use. So as of today, our plan is to use water level loggers or pressure transducers, depending on who you talk to, and start to correlate flow in the main channel to water elevation in these backwater habitats. By building these correlations at multiple sites, we hope to really see the water surface elevation and the corresponding flow needed in the river to maintain that elevation in the backwater. And that hopefully will support our future release decisions. If we find a sweet spot, per se, where X amount of water over X amount of time gives us the most bang for the buck, and I hope we find that out in the first year, wouldn't that be nice? The duration of connectivity is incorporated, and all this information will be incorporated into a fisheries response model. As I mentioned earlier, we have this program that collects a lot of data for the recovery of these fish, and using this data and their data, hopefully in conjunction, and developing this model where we can really start to see the benefits of this water and the backwater connectivity. Adaptive management in my line of work is kind of it's kind of hard to grab onto, but I think for this project, it really makes sense because we have this opportunity to design experiments over a 10-year duration of the water lease, where we can have a multitude of different flow conditions, whether it's a high snowpack year or a drought year, and we can really start to ask questions in real time and adapt our decision making to the answers to those questions. We have a lot of confounding factors. Obviously, science is really hard. That's why not everybody does it. And we've got antecedent peak flows, like what happened the year before and how does that set up the system's habitat in subsequent years? Monsoon events, those things are, we heard about water quality and what can happen to monsoon events, and some of the backwaters that we're interested in having fish in were discussed earlier today in a previous presentation. This potential for base flow augmentation in subsequent years, we discussed it as an option. It wasn't the decision that we made this year. But how can we use those things? And this adaptive management is going to allow us the framework to answer those questions at the proper time when the conditions really set us up to get a good answer. And obviously, we want to produce the biggest, everybody wants to produce the biggest bang for the buck, right? We want as much for free as possible. And our hope is that by bringing in all these cooperators, working in this adaptive network, adaptive management framework, and collecting good data, that we can start to narrow in over the 10 years on producing the biggest bang for the buck. And then as a a secondary objective is maybe more people want to try this. Joe indicated that 20,000 acre feet isn't much. There's more water for sale other places. Maybe this can start the bigger conversation of how we might do things in the future to help the native fish, the habitat, and water quality. And with that, I'll ask for the rest of my folks to come up and we could answer any questions if there are some.
So I'll just point out that photo is Navajo Dam releasing 4,000 CFS. And that was taken last week. So the outlet capacity is 5,000. For reasons I'll go into later, they don't release that much.
I don't know who my question's for, but have you guys thought about some kind of metric to qualify your successes throughout your program? You guys got thought of that yet?
So I don't think we've necessarily come up with a metric, and just jump in on this. What I think we're looking, especially in these first few years, is to get comfortable with the monitoring approach and then look at the data and sort of see from there what metrics may be developed. Obviously, we're interested in these backwater areas that are utilized by the fish, and so we would want to increase connectivity and the duration of the connectivity, but we haven't said we want X number of days. If that makes sense.
I'd say we might, the first few years, as Colleen says, is really kind of understanding the physical connection issue, but we're certainly working with the larval fish monitoring group and the other fish monitoring groups, and ultimately we hope that as we understand this connectivity, that perhaps that information will feed into their assessments of whether we're seeing a response at the fish level. Are they using these backwater areas? Are we seeing any more recruitment happening as a result?
Yeah, that's I think really good point, is the data we collect related to our release feeds into this larger recovery program for the fish. So we're hoping that we provide valuable data to the program, and then we also receive feedback from the program, and that may help us in developing metrics in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation, guys. This is an awesome project, and I hope that it is explored and replicated in other parts of the state. My question is, have you received any negative feedback from local stakeholders on higher flows, potentially from a flooding or erosion, or just has there been any negative feedback from the community around higher releases? Thank you.
I can take that one. So I wouldn't say that we directly have received negative feedback on that. Bureau of Reclamation controls the dam release, and the outlet works capacity is 5,000 CFS, but Reclamation is no longer able to release that full amount due to flooding concerns and floodplain encroachment. So they work very closely with San Juan County's Emergency Management Department, and forgive me, I'm spacing on their exact name.
Office of Emergency Management.
Office of Emergency Management. And so what they were seeing was between releases of 4,300 CFS to 4,600 CFS, there were a couple downstream property owners that experienced flooding, including flooding of structures. And so that's a problem that I'll touch on a little bit in the next presentation. So I would say that is sort of the only negative, but these are structures that are built within the floodplain.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Austin. I'm with Navajo EPA. Right now, the USGS has a couple of gauges that We're established under WINAC funding on the Mancos, the Chaco, Chinle, and McElmo Creek at the mouth of all those. Funding for that's going to end next fiscal year. I don't know if that would benefit you guys to continue knowing what's coming down those tributaries. If there's some way we could continue to get funding for that, would that benefit you guys?
I think possibly, and perhaps during the poster session, I could talk to you a little bit about that with ISC's planner, Sarah Goldstein, who's here also.
Okay.
My question is, this whole project, what effects does the power generation at Powell have on this whole project? If they're forcing early releases or anything like that throughout the system? I know that there's some stuff on the Colorado River that's going on for power generation and stuff like that. And I was just wondering if this project has any bearing on that particular issue. Thank you.
Oh, do you have?
I'm done.
Okay, I guess I can start that and Jacob.
I was just going to remind if you guys would want to step over and use the speakers over here. Just I remember that our speakers on Zoom.
Oh, sure. So I would say that there's not necessarily a direct connection to those issues at Powell, except if there's a declared shortage, because the water that's being used for this project belongs to the Hickory-Apache Nation. So if any of the folks with storage contracts in Navajo get in a shortage situation, then we may have less water to be able to purchase from the Hickory-Apache Nation. That being said, this water does go downstream eventually to Powell. So I would think that we're doing our little bit to help that. One of the things I mentioned to you was the Strategic Water Reserve, which is New Mexico's way of being able to purchase this water. And one of those designated uses is for compact compliance. So if we ever needed this water to help meet our downstream obligations to other states, we could do that. But part of what we're hoping to do through this monitoring program is to gain enough information so if that's the case, we can do it in a way that maximizes benefits to fish as well.
Another real quick, short question, and that is with the drought declaration agreements that are currently being negotiated, do you see that having any impact on this whole project of monitoring? Do you know what I'm asking about?
Are you talking from a funding perspective or additional monitoring that might be done?
No.
As far as tracking?
This lower basin states have kind of been declared a drought shortage area.
Right.
And the question is do you see that impacting your monitoring in any way of this project?
I wouldn't say necessarily the monitoring of this project. I think other folks in my agency are going to be looking at actually tracking the water downstream to, potentially at some point be able to make an estimate of X percent actually made it to Powell. Right now we have some rough models of that, but they definitely are rough. And so we will, be working on things like that. Is that what you were referring to?
Well, the Bureau of Reclamation has stated that we need to cut back by 2 to 5 million acre feet on the Colorado River. Mm-hmm. My question is how will your project be impacted by those requirements? once they're developed. And I know it's still kind of wishy-washy, I understand that, but there have been some federal funding coming up to help soothe the feathers on downstream, you know. And I was just wondering what kind of impact, if any, do you foresee in monitoring long-term aspects of releases from?
I think there's a potential with all the different federal pots of money that are out there for us to get more money related to the monitoring of this. As far as, you know, cutbacks in usage, this isn't really a depletive use per se. So I don't think that we would necessarily have to cut back on the water release unless, I said before, like there was a shortage declaration. And then all of the folks with storage contracts in Navajo Reservoir would be cut back. And I believe that there's not an agreement in place at this point, so that would have to be negotiated again.
And I think they have kind of determined that Navajo is not or hasn't been a big enough source supply to really make a difference in Lake Powell and the lake and the electricity generation. So, and that's what's kind of sad about this whole thing is it's more about the electric generation than it is actually the use of the water for different purposes. And so as long as we can generate power, everything's cool. But once we can't generate power, nothing's cool anymore. And so we're taking a big hit just to provide electricity for the people that are downstream from Navajo Lake. Thank you.
I would say that you're right about Navajo not being a good source of additional water for Powell. Navajo runs generally on a pretty small margin.
Very tight.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bear with me, guys. You guys are going to have to listen to me some more. I would like to thank, on behalf of the Interstate Stream Commission, our partners, the Hickory Apache Nation and the Nature Conservancy. And personally, I'd really like to thank Jacob and Joe for being such great partners in this adventure. And bear with me because I'm going to be talking a lot more about fish. And I am not a fish biologist, although I work with a lot of them. And I'm not a natural public speaker, so this is a lot. This is also some pretty dense stuff, and I'm going to move through it pretty quickly. We just published this paper, The Need for Constructing Endangered Fish Habitats That Conform to Climate-Driven Flow Changes in a Western U.S. River. Need a shorter title, in the Journal of American Water Resources Association. And I wanted to thank my co-authors who aren't here, Rich Valdez from SWCA, Alia Fati, my boss at the ISC, and Deborah Freeman, an attorney and partner with Trout Rayleigh in Denver. And so this paper is all about razorback sucker and Colorado pike minnow, which you've heard a little bit about already. So, San Juan River. Hopefully most of us are pretty familiar with the San Juan. It's a medium-sized desert river, about 600 miles long from Colorado to Lake Powell. It's the smallest of the 3 subbasins in the upper Colorado River, but contributes about 15% of the flow of the upper basin. It's also one of the muddiest rivers in the U.S. So, the fish habitat in the upper Colorado Basin was greatly reduced by the construction of Glen Canyon Dam on the Colorado River in 1963 and Navajo Dam on the San Juan River in 1962. Also, about 70 kilometers of the San Juan is cooled by the releases from Navajo Reservoir. So, and then if you look at the lower left-hand figure, it shows the gradients of the rivers in the upper basin. And you'll notice that the San Juan has the steepest gradient of all of the rivers that are occupied by these species of concern. So San Juan hydrology. For those of you who are not as familiar with the San Juan, the historical, and I would say going forward into the future, hydrology, highly variable. Usually with high spring runoff from snowmelt and a low summer base flow. Before the dams and water development, the river produced nearly 1.8 million acre feet of water per year. After the dams and water development, down to about 1.6 million acre feet per year. And then you add climate change and ongoing drought to that. So according to some reclamation reports, the period from 2000 to 2020 was the driest 21 period in over 100 years, and one of the driest in nearly 1,200 years. So coupling climate change, lower hydrology, and water diversions, you're getting flow reductions in order of 30%. So we talked a little bit about the fish recovery program, and I'm not going to go over everything on this slide, but just touch on some of the main points. We've been going about recovery for about 30 years, and unfortunately, we still don't have self-sustaining populations of these two species in the San Juan River, but that's not for lack of trying. So all of this started in 1991 with a biological opinion for the Animas La Prada project, which was talked about in that video that we watched at lunch. And the recovery program was set out as a reasonable and prudent alternative in that biological opinion. And so in 1992, that's when the program officially started. There was research period, stocking, and some flow recommendations, which we also talked about a little bit already. So the flow recommendations really were designed to kind of mimic the natural hydrograph of the San Juan River in an effort to create and maintain fish habitat through the dam releases. Unfortunately, for various reasons, it hasn't quite been working the way we thought it would. So we contend, and that's a major point in this paper, that the San Juan River doesn't currently support all of the necessary habitat elements for Colorado pike minnow. Evidence is compelling that the pike minnow is a highly migratory species that once ranged from the estuary of the Gulf of California to the upper basin and has high fidelity for specific spawning sites in canyon reaches. So there are 4 populations in the upper basin. You can see the dots on there. The larvae of the Colorado pike minnow drift after spring runoff into sandy backwater areas where they remain until the following spring. One of the problems is in the San Juan, we just don't have a lot of these habitat areas like you see in the Green and Upper Colorado rivers. So similarly, for the razorback sucker, we don't think that the San Juan River currently supports all of the necessary habitat elements to recover this species. They're also highly migratory and with high fidelity for specific spawning sites and canyon reaches. And so one of the problems is that the likely spawning sites for some of these species or the larval areas where they hung out while they developed and grew were mostly downstream. And when Glen Canyon Dam was put into place, a lot of these became under Lake Powell. And so the limited areas that were available in the San Juan were then further limited because they became underwater. So, our hypothesis was that contemporary San Juan rivers not suitable for recovery of Colorado pike minnow and razorback sucker due to a lack of nursery habitat. So San Juan, like we talked about, narrower and steeper and shallower than the Green and Colorado rivers where these species have self-sustaining populations. Not necessarily unique to the San Juan, but it is very prevalent in the San Juan. We have a lot of non-native vegetation that anchors the shorelines and limits the formation of habitats even when we have higher flows. And these are just steep confined channels lacking a lot of floodplain connection. So back to the flow recommendations. So these were developed after the 7-year research period, and we had talked about, the effort that went into these was to mimic the natural hydrograph to create and maintain habitat for these protected species. Well, what we have found is that an analysis that was done in 2018 was that we were having a really difficult time meeting these flow targets at the frequencies that they were set out to be met. When they were developed, they were based on the assumption that future hydrology would be statistically the same as the modeled period of record. So the period of record was 1929 to 1993. So post-1993 ended up looking a lot drier. And that's part of the reason why we weren't able to meet these flow targets. This 2018 analysis was kind of interesting. It resulted in some operational changes in the dam releases in an effort to increase the frequency of meeting these flow targets. However, the analysis concluded that even with these changes, low likelihood of meeting the frequency of the flow targets. And that because of that, the desired habitat goals would be unlikely to be achieved. So the graphic is a little bit hard to read, but the important thing there is to know that the only primary flow target achieved was the lowest flow target of about 5,000 CFS at the Four Corners gauge in 80% of the orange years. So that's shown in the orange bars there. Higher flows just generally weren't achieved at the desired frequency. Because of an inadequate supply of water is probably the primary one, but there are also some other things that we're going to talk about why it's so difficult to meet these flow targets. So the main gist of our paper is we need to work on constructing habitats for these species. But I think there's a lot of support for this. The last time we were able to meet all of the flow targets was 2019, and we were still off by about 1 day on one of the targets. So this year, even with really good hydrology, we weren't able to meet the highest flow target of 10,000 CFS for 5 or more days at Four Corners. So this is one of these situations where you have to get like the stars to align perfectly to meet all of the flow targets, because what happens is Bureau of Reclamation in concert with the San Juan Recovery Program starts releasing from Navajo Dam when there's enough water to do so, and they try to time it with the natural peak of the Animas River to get as much bang for the buck at Four Corners. However, you can miss the peak, or you can have a year like this year where the Animas is running great, but it's a low magnitude, long duration peak. And so there's just not enough coming out of the Animas to get us to that 10,000 target. And so, you know, it becomes really more difficult under drier conditions or with just more hydrologic variability to meet these flow targets. And then we get to the issue that was brought up about downstream flooding concerns. And now the Navajo Dam, which was able to release 5,000 CFS previously to help meet those higher goals, can now only release 4,300 CFS before you start having the flooding issues due to floodplain development, encroachment, and the changing shape of the channel from the non-native vegetation encroachment. So it's becoming harder and harder to meet those flow targets. The optimization report that was done in 2021 was a modeling exercise that looked at what operational changes could further be done at Navajo to potentially increase the frequency of meeting the flow targets. Unfortunately, that report came up with, there's not much that can be done. We've pretty much maximized or optimized that. Each year, the recovery program has an assessment and review by the larger Fish and Wildlife Service, and it's called a Sufficient Progress Report. And so in that Sufficient Progress Report, the Fish and Wildlife Service actually recommended that the RIP conduct habitat construction and restoration projects at the appropriate spatial and temporal scale to complement flow management in an effort to recover the species. And I think that's really what we're saying too, is that neither one of these on their own is the answer, but doing them in concert increases your potential to recover the species. So just a little bit about floodplain disconnection. It's not unique to the San Juan River. It's a pretty common theme in western US rivers, as are floodplain restoration or connection projects. So some of the examples in western areas are removal and breaching of sand berms on the floodplains of the Green River for entrainment of larval razorback sucker, excavation of large backwaters in the lower Colorado River for razorback sucker and bony tail. That's another endangered species that we don't have in our basin. And the mechanical reconnection of floodplains in the middle Rio Grande is nurseries for the Rio Grande silvery minnow. So probably most New Mexicans have heard of the Rio Grande silvery minnow. It's always in the news. There are lots of habitat projects going on to support that species. And then these kind of projects don't necessarily have to just benefit fish. There's a lot of work being done on the Platte River to support birds, specifically the sandhill crane, the interior least tern, and the piping plover. So this is not to say that these projects are easy, especially in the San Juan River. The San Juan is a difficult system to work in. Highly variable flow, heavy sedimentation, monsoonal storms, not every year, we hope we get them, and sudden flash floods. So it's not easy. And if you've been driving around while you're up here, you've seen all of the rafted debris along the Animas and the San Juan, which also complicates things. One particular project that the recovery program worked on was called Phase 3. It was great while it stayed in place. It entrained larval fish like we wanted it to, but it was wiped out when a sudden flash flood washed around and eroded the intake structure. And relatively speaking, for the San Juan, this was not a huge flash flood, but it was a flash flood event. And this sort of emphasizes the need for careful planning and engineering for these extreme conditions. This is not a system where you can just get anybody out on a backhoe, build a habitat feature, and expect it to stay. It's just way more complicated than that. So in conclusion, we talked about the contemporary San Juan River, not suitable for the recovery of the two species due to a lack of nursery habitat, and that flow management alone can't create or maintain these habitats. And we're advocating for a more concerted effort to design and construct nursery habitats through the program to complement the flow recommendations. The big thing with this is that the design has to conform with available flows. And so that means it has to function at a variety of levels. Because from year to year, it's going to become harder and harder with climate change variability to know what water levels might be. So you can't just design for one level. You have to design features that function at multiple levels. And this is not a you build it, walk away kind of thing. What we're saying is this is a complex design process, a complex system, and that these habitats will need tweaking and maintenance. And so in any plan for a restoration project, you should have additional funding, not only to monitor the success of your project going forward, but to do any additional maintenance or tweaking that needs to be done in the future. And so just to wrap up with our paper, we didn't say, oh, this is the design that you should use in the San Juan, because I think there are potentially a lot of different ideas that could come into play and should be tested out. What we're just saying is that we think the best way to go about recovering these species is to really work on habitat restoration in conjunction with flow management. And I hope I didn't go too fast, and I apologize because that was a little dense. This was last given to a group made up almost entirely of fisheries biologists. So. And Jacob, correct me if I misspoke on anything.
Okay, everyone, if you could start making your way back to your seats. We're in the home stretch now, our last two oral presentations before our poster session begins here at, maybe a little bit before 3:30. I'd like to welcome up here Dr. Ben Linhoff. He's a research hydrologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, New Mexico Water Science Center. He specializes in water geochemistry, water quality, and hydrology in groundwater and surface waters.
Okay. Well, hi, everybody. Again, my name is Ben Linhoff. I'm with the U.S. Geological Survey, New Mexico Water Science Center. Today I'm going to be talking about Chaco Culture National Historical Park and the potential effects of hydrocarbon extraction on the water resources at the park. My talk will be followed by my colleague Zach Shepard, who will be talking about the same project, but our modeling efforts to understand the groundwater flows in the area and the potential effects of oil and gas extraction on the water quality. This project is led by USGS in partnership with the National Park Service and in cooperation and with technical assistance from Navajo Nation. And with that, I'll get started. So a little bit about Chaco. Chaco Culture National Historical Park is a mouthful, but it's centered on Chaco Canyon, which if you've not been there, you should definitely check it out. I think it's about one of my favorite places in North America. It's a pretty incredible place. Chaco Canyon has the highest concentration of Chacoan historical sites, including dozens of major complexes, monumental masonry, and earthen structures. Some of these buildings were the largest in North America up until the end of the 1800s, to give you an idea of how large these structures are. Most of the buildings were constructed between 850 and 1250 CE, and it's the ancestral homelands of the Pueblo people. So it's basically been a religious site and a sacred site for about 1,000 years, and continues to be so today. I think one of the coolest parts about Chaco is that the Chacoan people were very good astronomers in addition to being good engineers, and a quick story about that. So most of you are probably not aware that the lunar cycles go through an 18-year cycle and a 9-year cycle. Well, these cycles were very important to the Chacoan people. We know this because many of their buildings are actually aligned with these lunar cycles. Chaco Canyon itself may have been chosen because it aligns with some of these long-term lunar cycles. So just imagine the generations of observations you would have to make to know that. They also paid attention to the lunar cycles like the equinox. Today's the solstice, so a good time to talk about Chaco. I went there on a camping trip on the spring equinox a couple years ago, and if you show up there for the spring equinox, it's pretty fun. You can get up really early, stay in their campground. It's freezing cold. You go to this on a ranger-led walk to one of the buildings. And on the equinox every year, there's a window where the sun comes up and shines through one window right at dawn and then goes through the other window. And you can all get in a line. The people watching is amazing. And it was super fun, and then the ranger is giving you this talk about, what great astronomers the Chacoan people were, how great this place is, but also that this building was constructed by archaeologists who thought that there was probably windows here. Maybe there's a wall in front of it though, so maybe this wasn't where they observed the equinox, but it's nice to be up in the morning, and so, so that was kind of, and he told that right when we watched the sunrise, so anyways, kind of a buzzkill, but cool place. I recommend going there. All right, so Chaco is in the center of the San Juan Basin near major oil and gas deposits. So in the top of the figure, you can see the outline of Chaco Canyon. All those numbered sites, those are the wells that we were able to sample for water chemistry. And all the black dots are all the oil and gas boreholes. So these are active oil wells or inactive oil wells. Some of them are injection sites to deal with some of the fracking fluid. Some of them are places where they pulled water out to frack with. So you can see there's thousands of boreholes pockmarking the San Juan Basin. A little closer in on the park. So this study is focused on the park's drinking water supply. That big red circle is where the drinking water supply is. The dotted line is a 5-kilometer radius around the park's drinking water. And the solid circle is a 10-kilometer. So you can see even within a 3-mile radius, or 5 kilometers, there's quite a few oil and gas related wells and boreholes near the park. So, concern for Chaco Canyon and the potential effects of oil and gas drilling has garnered local and national attention. On my drive up from Albuquerque to Farmington today, land doesn't have anything to do with the state land or existing leases or private land or tribal land. So we'll see what the next administration does. But anyway, it's an issue of national concern. But we're focused on the park's well. So the park's drinking water well is in the Gallup Sandstone Aquifer, and some other sometimes oil. Let's see, what did I write up there? Yeah, so it's in the Gallup Sandstone. The Gallup Sandstone sometimes is an oil-bearing unit. Oftentimes it just has water in it. The Manco Shale surrounds the Gallup Sandstone, and the Manco Shale, sometimes we think of it as a hydrologically confining rock unit around the Gallup Sandstone. So this is like a unit that water is not going to be able to move from the Gallup outside of it, or at least that's what you would think. However, there could be nearby hydrofracking or oil and gas drilling. So how is that going to affect the park's well? So the well that the park is served by is 3,090 feet deep. So it's an extremely deep well. It's really the only potable water in the area. The park worked for like 50 years to find potable water. They finally dug this well, I think, in the 1970s. And yeah, so it's kind of like the only water source there. That sort of makes it a unique in this kind of study, where normally your drinking water aquifer is quite shallow, and the fracking and hydrocarbon deposits are very, very deep, like down in the Permian Basin. In this case, the drinking water aquifer is right surrounded by the oil-bearing units. So, is this well vulnerable to contamination from nearby oil and gas extraction? So, our study goals are to assess baseline water quality and relevant aquifers. This is so that future sampling that can compare our results to and determine, whether or not there's been changes. Determine groundwater age and flow directions, analyze groundwater for hydrocarbon-related contaminants, and examine the potential for contamination from nearby oil and gas extraction. All right, so we scoured the earth for wells to sample. Fortunately, we had some help with Navajo Nation to help us find suitable wells to sample. There's a lot of old wells there that have been, were dug decades and decades ago that are no longer functioning or are behind fences. But we managed to find 11 wells to sample. We hit 2 wells in the national park. The park's well is the red dot up within the park well 602. Most of the wells we sampled were in the Gallup Sandstone. Those are the black circles. But we also sampled wells in other relevant aquifers for all sorts of chemical constituents. All right, so getting right into some of our chemistry results. So the region's groundwater is extremely old. Our youngest groundwater we measured was 22,000 years old. The median age of all the waters we sampled was 41,000 years old. And this is according to carbon dating, so carbon-14 dating, where carbon-14 decays at a constant rate. You can measure the carbon-14 in a water sample and back calculate how old it is. It's a lot more complex than that because there's water-rock interactions. But we did the modeling efforts, and these are our best estimates. But the cool thing and crazy thing is that the groundwater in this area originated as rainfall before humans arrived in North America. So any groundwater withdrawals will not be replaced by recharge. So anything that comes out of the San Juan Basin is not going back in anytime soon. All right. So we also measured noble gases. So noble gases are pretty complex stuff to look at. The reason we look at them is because in normal cases, you can measure the noble gases of a water, and the ratio of the noble gases can tell you what the temperature of that water was when it originated in recharge in the aquifer. So you could say that a water was colder during recharge, maybe that came from a mountain range, and maybe it was warmer, or maybe you can calculate out that it was a warm water that recharged the aquifer, so maybe that water came from a basin area, low elevations, or a different climate when it was warmer or colder. So that's what you can normally do there, and that's what we sampled noble gases for. We found something very different in these samples. On the top left of this plot, you can see the temperatures, the 5 degrees, 10 degrees, 15 degrees. That's where we would normally expect our samples to plot. None of our samples plotted anywhere near there. And so we scratched our heads for a long time trying to figure out what was going on. Eventually we came up with this hypothesis that really the only way to get the results that we see is that if this groundwater is mixing with extremely old water, like millions of years old water, that was expelled from oil during the formation of the hydrocarbons themselves. So kind of a cool, crazy result. These results allowed us to show that there's some mixing between the aquifers, and also, demonstrated the impact of hydrocarbons on the water chemistry in the region, and potential mixing between aquifers. But you don't have to really understand this graph, like the xenon and neon. But yeah, the point is that there's some hydrocarbon-influenced water that's mixing between aquifers. So speaking of mixing between aquifers, we can take a closer look at that. If mixing is occurring, the groundwater well at Chaco could be more vulnerable to contamination from nearby hydrocarbon extraction. So the Chaco well, again, is screened in the Gallup sandstone. We sampled wells in the Point Lookout sandstone, the Menifee Formation, and the Cliff House sandstone. So those were the aquifers we were able to find wells to sample. Near hydrocarbon-related boreholes are in sort of all of those units. If you had, say, contamination coming from the Dakota Formation, can that move into the Gallup sandstone, or vice versa, or something like that? So that's a reason we're looking at mixing. All right, so we examined the groundwater's geochemical evolution and mixing relationships to help determine the flow paths and cross-aquifer mixing. So in all of these plots I'm showing here, essentially, we use these kind of plots to look at the geochemical evolution of the water. So when water lands on the Earth's surface, it travels through the soil, through the subsoil, through the bedrock, through the aquifer. Tens of thousands of years later, minerals have dissolved, added elements to it. Minerals have precipitated out, taken elements away, so it's changed the chemistry of the water. And so we can look at these sort of plots and tell stories about that water and determine what waters are more chemically evolved than other waters. So it's a way to sort of relatively date waters. So we're able to say through this analysis that some waters in the north are older than the waters in the south. So we know that the water is moving from the south to the north, and Zach will talk a lot more about that next. The other interesting thing about these plots is that they all kind of plot in a line. If the aquifers were really distinctly chemistry, like if there's no mixing between them, you would see these dots all sort of plotting random locations around them. Instead, they're all sort of plotting in a line, telling you that, well, perhaps there's mixing between these aquifers. Another interesting thing is that in every plot I could make, wells 155 and 219 are pretty similar. One of them is in the Gallup sandstone, the other one's in the Menifee Formation. Reminder of where those are. Here's the picture of the Gallup, which is in the middle, and the Menifee is up higher. So, it looks from those plots that there's mixing between the Gallup through the Mancos Shale, which should be a confining unit, all the way up into the Menifee Formation. So all these plots look like that. Here's some more geochemical plots we looked at, showing these mixing relationships. Again, this well in the Gallup Formation, 219, and the Menifee Formation, 155, are plotted similar. If you want more details about these figures, please read our recent paper. All right, so what might be going on? Again, there's really a lot of oil and gas wells in this region. It kind of, it's like a pincushion through the San Juan Basin. So could mixing be facilitated through the many hydrocarbon-related boreholes in the region? It certainly seems possible. We can take a closer look at where these wells are, 155 and 219, that looks like they're mixed together. The labeled wells, you can see 155 and 219. All the other sites around that, those are all hydrocarbon-related boreholes or oil and gas boreholes. They're all inactive sites, so they're all, say, decades old, and so there's been decades of time for potential leakage to go into these boreholes and then move up and down, kind of mixing between aquifers. In that circumference is only 1 kilometer radius, so 0.6 miles. So a lot of activity there. All right, so another important result from our study is that we found low-level benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene, or the BTEX compounds you may have heard of, were found in multiple aquifers, including at the park's main well. We sampled the park's main well for these compounds about 5 times with multiple blanks and duplicates and replicates, just to make sure that we had that result right, because we didn't want to come out and say, the Park Service, we found some BTEX compounds in your well with just one sample. So we went out and resampled that a number of times. Most of those compounds were found in the Cliff House sandstone unit and in the Gallup sandstone. So, where are they coming from? They could be naturally occurring. Again, this is an area, there's a lot of hydrocarbons in the area. The water is influenced by hydrocarbons, but, they could be migration of hydrocarbon fluids could be facilitated through all these oil and gas boreholes and wells. All right, so some project highlights from this part of the project. C14 dating found very old water that's slow and moving to the north. Noble gases demonstrated groundwater is influenced by hydrocarbons or oil and gas. Mixing is likely between the drinking water aquifers and hydrocarbon-bearing units. And low-level BTEX compounds were found in the drinking water in the aquifer. All right, so we have a new paper out in the Journal of Hydrology Regional Studies. We have one more that's going to follow that Zach will be the lead author on. That should come out later this summer. And with that, I'll put up my summary slide here. Feel free to email me with any questions or talk to me after. But this is our summary or graphical abstract from the paper, and I'll take any questions. Well, don't all jump at once. I
got a question. Is there Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Is there a way to test whether or not some of these formations are hydrologically connected with pumping tests or something? Could that is being considered at all?
So that could certainly be possible. I think that would be beyond the funding for this project. But yeah, that would be definitely a way that you could definitely test that. I don't know if any of the oil and gas companies have done that.
Thank you for this work. It was a really great presentation and really fascinating. I'm curious, this is a really good indicator for groundwater quality that is used for drinking water throughout the Navajo Nation. Mm-hmm. Has similar studies like this been done for domestic wells in the Navajo Nation, or this could be a starting point for other studies and other aquifers in the area?
Yeah, so they're really, to me, it's kind of surprising that the amount of oil and gas stuff going on in the San Juan Basin, and then the absence of water quality work, going alongside that. And so no, I don't really know of any studies that are looking at that. We looked at sampling some of the local chapters water. Actually a couple of our sites are some of the local chapter houses water. But yeah, I don't really know of anybody else who's done this. All right. Well, thank you everybody again.
All right. Thank you, Ben. Okay, and last but certainly not least today for our oral presentations will be Zach Shepard. Zach is a hydrologist at the USGS New Mexico Water Science Center in Albuquerque. While attending New Mexico Tech, he joined the Geological Survey in 2016 as a graduate student and transitioned to his current position in 2019, soon after graduating. Zach's work has included applying a variety of surface water, groundwater, and water quality models in urban, natural, and post-wildfire environments. Zach also currently leads hydrologic modeling projects related to oil and gas development and quantifying components of the water balance of the Bosque del Apache Wildlife Refuge. Thanks so much, Zach, and there we go.
All right, thanks everyone for sticking around to the end of the day. My name is Zach Shepard. I'm a hydrologist at the New Mexico Water Science Center. I just want to thank my co-authors and colleagues real quick. Andre Ritchie, Ben Lindhoff, of course, and John Lunzer, who helped pretty substantially with this project. So as Ben mentioned, this is kind of a continuation of the analysis of assessing vulnerability of water resources at the park. So similar goal, but for this portion of the project, we developed a numerical groundwater flow model. And this was done to delineate the area of where water is flowing through the subsurface to the park's main well, which we're going to call the capture zone, and estimate the amount of time it took to flow through that zone. And then we ran some pretty simplified scenarios that simulate hydraulic fracturing and how they may influence pathways through the subsurface and travel times through the subsurface. So a part of making the model, we also developed new potentiometric surfaces or groundwater level surfaces of the Gallup sandstone. And this was done just to inform the model, calibrate the model, but also to assess the change in the water level surface through historical and modern time periods. So the study area is located in the San Juan Basin, the geologic San Juan Basin, and major aquifers in the area just include confined sandstones that are generally confined by thick layers of shale, and these are of Cretaceous and Jurassic age. And as Ben mentioned, the park constructed a over 3,000 foot well, which I'll refer to as the Chaco well, into the Gallup sandstone in 1972. So there's a lot of overlap and recycled figures here with Ben's talk, but the layers that we specifically developed the groundwater model through are the Manco Shale and Gallup sandstone. So within the vicinity of the park, the Gallup sandstone and the Manco Shale both kind of generally dip to the northeast, and the Gallup ranges in thickness between 100 and 200 feet, and the upper and lower Manco Shale are very thick. They range between 600 and 1,300 feet in total thickness. As Ben mentioned, recharge to the Gallup sandstone is generally pretty limited. That water is very old. And recharge generally occurs where the Gallup sandstone outcrops of the surface very far south of the park. Okay, so this is a study area map. The park is generally kind of centered in this map, outlined in purple color. That rectangle you see outlined in black is the area that we modeled. And then that larger brown outline is the subsurface extent of the Gallup sandstone. All those points that you see with lines through them, those are areas where we either collected or we compiled historical groundwater levels or collected new levels, and we kind of categorize those into two different time periods. So the first time period, which I'll refer to as the historical time period, varied between the 50s and the late 80s. Following that time period, there was a substantial increase in drilling since the technology and the science improved, and it was easier to drill and get gas from shale formations. So that's the historical time period for water levels, and then modern we're kind of arbitrarily defining as 2016 to 2020, which was kind of when the project relatively started. So we use those water levels to develop potentiometric surfaces using a Kriging algorithm, which interpolates the levels in between where we have discrete measurements. And we've difference the historical and modern surfaces in order to get a change in head over those time periods. So development of the model itself, it was developed in ModFlow. The map on the bottom right is kind of a zoomed in close-up of the area that we specifically modeled. So it's a small rectangular area, rotated, and it's about 25 by 31 miles in size. Grid cells are 15 by 1,500 feet. The model is 11 layers. 5 of those layers are in the upper Mako Shale. 1 is in the Gallup Sandstone, and the remaining 5 are in the lower Mako Shale. So the model simulates steady state conditions relative to the modern potentiometric surface in the Gallup Sandstone, meaning that surface remains the same level through time, and there's no variable flux into the model or variable pumping rates over the period that we were simulating. So the boundaries of the model, the northeast boundary is a no-flow boundary, and it kind of aligns with the northeasternmost extent of the Gallup Sandstone. The northwest boundary is a constant head boundary, which was fit to the modern potentiometric surface, and the southeast and southwest boundaries are where water is simulated to flux into the model. Parameters that we calibrated the model to include horizontal hydraulic conductivity, vertical hydraulic conductivity, and those fluxes into the model. So we use a program called ModPath to assess travel paths and travel times through our model. We ran the model with 2 different pumping rates from the Chaco well. One that was about 1,200 cubic feet per day, which is representative of kind of maximum pumping rates that I could find from previously published reports. And then we ran the model at pumping rates of 10,000 cubic feet per day, which kind of represents a potential increase in demand of water use in the park, which is estimated on the very high side to play things on the safe side. So the desired output from the model was so we could delineate the capture zone, do travel time analysis, and then these hydraulic fracturing scenarios, which are kind of illustrated in this image that's to the right. The image is showing 5 layers of 5 model layers of the upper and lower Mancos in gray, and Gallup Sandstone in yellow, and then those green zones are representative of areas that we increase the hydraulic conductivity to simulate the increase that might occur from fracturing the shale. So this is a very, very simplified approach to attempting to model hydraulic fracturing and hydraulic fracturing fluid migration. We didn't consider some effects like increased pressure or changes in density and buoyancy of these fluids. But that's something that for future studies could be done to increase the accuracy of these models. Oops. Okay, so finally moving into some results. So this figure is a map that shows the historical and modern potentiometric surfaces difference from each other. And it's probably hard to read from where you're sitting, but kind of the take-home message here is that there was a change in the groundwater level surface between about 34 and 96 feet within the vicinity of the park itself between the 80s to present day. I'll go through this really quickly, but model calibration, the mean absolute residual error between the Krieg hydraulic surface in our simulated heads was about 33 feet, which is less than 5% of the total head drop across the whole modeled area. And the fit between our observed and simulated heads was the R squared fit was 0.93, which is representative of a fairly good fit. Okay, so now some actual model results. So I'm going to play an animation in a second, but to orient you, those lines that you're seeing are pathways, are simulated pathways that groundwater is taking through the Gallup Sandstone and Mako Shale. You'll see them kind of converge around one point in the middle, and that is that's the Chaco well, and you'll see some flowing around it. Let's see if I can get this. There it goes. So groundwater is generally flowing from south-southeast to northwest beneath the park. The average width of that capture zone, so the area where water is flowing to the well, is about 12 miles when pumping rates are 10,000 cubic feet per day. And another important take-home message here is groundwater is generally flowing horizontally through the model cells, meaning there's not a lot of natural mixing between the Mako Shale and the Gallup Sandstone layers. But once you get close to the well and you get pumping and you change gradients, that's when you start to get mixing between the shale and the sandstone. So same animation again, but travel times to the well through the Gallup Sandstone were on the order of magnitude of thousands to tens of thousands of years. Travel times through the shale were millions to tens of millions of years. So this is travel time from the boundary of the model to the well, but it's still pretty consistent with the carbon isotope dating that Ben did, where we see age of water between 43,000 years old and greater than 52,000 years old. Okay, so this figure is representative of the hydraulic fracturing simulation that we did. So those kind of cross-hatched areas are areas where we increase the hydraulic conductivity to kind of represent fractures in the shale, and then we tracked those particles from those zones to the well. And effectively, those fracture zones kind of acted like preferential pathways from the shale to the Gallup Sandstone, and that ultimately decreased travel times from the shale to the well. So, yeah, fracturing the rock kind of acts as a preferential pathway. So this figure is very similar to the one Ben showed, but those circles in the center of the map are 5 kilometer and 10 kilometer buffers around the park well. Those light blue lines are pathways of water through the Gallup Sandstone, and then the points on the map are inactive oil and gas related wells, and the color is the unit they were completed in. So we found 18 inactive wells, inactive hydrocarbon-related wells within the capture zone and 10 kilometers of the Chaco well. And given the model transport times, the model predicts travel from kind of the nearest of these wells would take roughly 430 years through the Gallup sandstone. But that's the potential for contamination from these wells would depend on if these casings are compromised. So conclusions, the potentiometric surface, so the groundwater level has decreased by approximately 34 to 96 feet in the Gallup sandstone in the past few decades. Modeling indicates waters flowing beneath the park from south-southeast to north-northwest. Travel times range from thousands to tens of thousands of years through the Gallup sandstone. There's 18 inactive hydrocarbon-related wells within the capture zone and 10 kilometers of the Chaco well. And some of our basic simulations of hydraulic fracturing indicate fractures could create preferential pathways for water to flow between units. So that's all I've got, but I'll take any of your questions.
There was a question from Zoom from Ronalda asking if there had been any baseline studies that had been done prior to oil and gas development in the region.
As far as modeling goes, so there have been a couple of regional scale models that were developed. One was in the 80s, one was in the late 90s, which are kind of more representative of like current development, although there's been development for decades within the basin. But yeah, there are some more larger scale models that do model some of the other aquifers in the area, but this type of analysis with travel times and mod path like flow analysis hasn't been done to my knowledge.
Hi. This may be sort of a basic question. I'm definitely not a hydrologist, but is the way to reduce the risk from the old wells that are not in use, is it to plug them? There seems to be a lot of abandoned well plugging programs going on right now.
Yeah, I think the best thing is just to make sure they're plugged properly and the well casings are not compromised. And in doing so, that would reduce the risk of creating those preferential pathways from overlying layers. I'm not super well versed in the actual oil and gas industry, but I think it's somewhat common practice to do so after leaving the wells.
And is there a way to reduce the risk when drilling new wells?
I don't know for sure. I mean, I guess I would just say like making sure well construction is good, good casing around steel, those kind of things. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It sounds like you might lose your potable water supply sometime in the future. Would it be possible to tap into the potable water line that's running down 550 from Cutter Dam?
Sorry, where? From?
The Navajo tribe in the Bureau of Reclamation put in a potable water line going down 550 from Cutter Dam.
Oh, got it.
Would it be possible for Chaco to tap into that?
Maybe potentially. I'm not super aware of that project. That sounds a lot like a kind of economical challenge for the most part.
It runs down, I think, to Cuba, but I think it goes also west, different laterals. I think it gets pretty close to Chaco.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe a possibility. That's a little bit out of my
You might
realm.
talk to Bureau Reclamation and get a map of the pipeline.
Got it. Yeah, and this project this is with the National Park Service, so it would take some interagency communication.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, cool. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Zach.